Chapter 668. The sun shone on the ground that seemed to have been burned by flames, and the surroundings were filled with a barren aura. The ground was barren, and there was no sign of life. Even the trees were only left with black branches that seemed to have been burned, giving people a feeling that they would break with a touch. The black branches were like forgotten people, quietly standing on this barren land. A few black figures wandered among them, hidden by the shadows of the forest formed by the black branches. Suddenly, a bright blue light lit up in the forest formed by the black branches, and a magic circle was automatically engraved on this barren land. The surrounding black figures slowly approached, and they could vaguely hear whispers that sounded like a spell. "Show yourself." However, they, who were no longer afraid of death, began to slowly approach this strange magic circle that might bring them food. Suddenly, the magic circle was engraved, and the light shone brightly, causing the few black figures hidden in the shadows to groan in pain, and at the same time, their figures were exposed. They were zombie-like creatures, and their faces were so thin that they were almost distorted. Filth mixed with blood wrapped around their bodies, and the black, smelly, and tattered cloth covered their bodies that were already riddled with holes and were as thin as firewood, as if it would not be strange if they died in the next moment. They, who were used to living in the dark, had a strong resistance to the sudden bright light. As they retreated, they used their arms to cover their faces with difficulty, as if their filthy bodies were not qualified to be exposed to the light. A few seconds later, the bright light disappeared, and the few figures returned to the shadows. This made them quiet down, but they did not put down the arms that covered their faces, as if they were afraid that the light would come again in the next moment. The sound of steel entered the ears of these zombie-like black figures. No, it was not steel, it was boots, the boots that they were familiar with, the boots that were worn by noble knights, made of steel. The sound of footsteps stepping on the ground. The black figures removed their arms and looked at the figure that appeared from the lit magic circle. It was a bright silver figure, and the silver-white armor and helmet covered the person's entire body, looking very holy. Their helmets also had protrusions that resembled dragon horns. Because of the helmet, their faces could not be seen clearly. However, this did not hinder the black shadows from killing the person inside the armor. The sound of the boots hitting the ground had terrified the shadows. They had become like this because they were wearing such boots. However, it was precisely because the young man was one of the perpetrators that the black shadows were filled with killing intent. On one hand, they feared the newcomer, but on the other hand, they hated the newcomer. They, who no longer cared about death, began to approach this sacred yet hateful figure. Wu Ming opened his ruby-like eyes from within the armor. "I'm not used to it." It had been a long time since Wu Ming looked through the helmet because his armor and helmet had long been lost in Camello. Whether it was the precious armor that he had given to Gadotzi in the America's Singularity, or the ordinary armor that he was wearing now that was condensed out of mana, it was not his real armor. After taking a deep breath, Wu Ming suddenly exhaled. "It's the smell of burning." Wu Ming looked around. When he saw that the horizon in the distance was also burned, he was not surprised. Although Wu Ming had seen the barren land through his authority in the root, when he experienced it himself, Wu Ming's brows furrowed even more. "What's wrong with this world?" Wu Ming sighed. His words were filled with doubts about why the land had become like this, and also about the black shadows around him that were filled with killing intent and wanted to attack him. After Wu Ming appeared from the heroic spirit summoning circle, he felt the killing intent around him. Maintaining the projection of his mental strength, he naturally saw the true faces of the surrounding black shadows that were filled with murderous intent towards him. They were humans, ordinary humans who had not died or been cursed. The reason why they had become zombie-like was because of hunger, Wu Ming guessed. Hunger had obliterated their human nature, leaving them with little appetite. Even their will to live had been obliterated. Because they had given up on struggling, they had no complaints even if they died now. To them, who were filled with fear of suicide, death was a release for them. There was no doubt that this was a contradiction. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and a bright silver holy sword appeared from a golden ripple beside Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming grabbed the sword and pointed it downward. Then, he channeled his magic power and stabbed the ground. Boom, crack, a loud sound was heard. A small but deep fissure appeared on the ground. In the end, the black shadows who had not completely obliterated their will to live were terrified. It was not difficult for high-ranking knights to crack the ground with a single strike. However, not many people could create such a small but deep fissure like the one before them. They could not defeat such a knight. Otherwise, they would not have become like this. The black shadows wanted to retreat, but Wu-Ming would not allow it. Crack, Wu-Ming gently turned the meteor silver that was inserted into the ground. Two cracks split from the small fissure that had already appeared, extending in an arc to both sides. In just a moment, these two cracks each extended half an arc and finally overlapped, forming a circle. And the black shadows just happened to be inside this circle. The black shadows who were frightened turned around and wanted to escape. But the moment they moved, the ground formed by the fissure suddenly sank. Clearly, Wu-Ming had already used his magic to dig out the ground below. Anyone who dared to move it would definitely cause the ground to sink. The black shadows were silent. They were already trapped here. If they were to face the Silver Knight behind them, there was no doubt that they would die. Roar, the black shadows let out a desperate roar. But because they had not spoken for a long time, their roar sounded like the roar of a beast. Facing these zombie-like humans, Wu-Ming did not use his sword. Instead, he sighed and shook his head. Then, he suddenly released his magic power. Boom, the magic power that was visible to the naked eye directly shook the black shadows that attacked Wu-Ming. The black shadows were sent flying to the ground. Due to Silent Cry's deliberate actions, the black shadows were not injured. They were only sent flying. Looking at these black shadows extending toward him, Wu-Ming felt despair and resentment. If Wu-Ming was their enemy, it would be understandable to have such a degree of resentment. But Wu-Ming had just arrived, so how could he be their enemy? In other words, these people regarded Wu-Ming as their enemy. No, if they had an enemy, then they would definitely not be able to survive. In other words, they regarded him as the person who persecuted them. Wu-Ming frowned. Then, Wu-Ming looked at these humans. Tell me the information, and I will give you food. The black shadows were stunned. After a few seconds, they nodded in unison. Chapter 669. Logically speaking, Wu-Ming shouldn't have any food, because the current Wu-Ming basically didn't need to eat. Even if he needed to eat, Wu-Ming could get the ingredients on the spot, so there was no need to store food at all. But because Wu-Ming had a contract with Olga Marie, Wu-Ming emptied a store in the burning Winterwood City because of Olga Marie. Although some of the food was consumed in the Winterwood City, there was still a lot left, so Wu-Ming took it out and gave it to the refugees who were still considered human for the time being. At that time, Wu-Ming only took some packaged food that could be stored for a long time, but for the refugees, as long as it was edible, they were already satisfied. In the end, Wu-Ming got the information that the refugees were given food and water and staggered away. Wu-Ming didn't say anything about saving them, because the hearts of these refugees were almost dead. Wu-Ming had a way to save their bodies, but there was no way to save their hearts. And once their hearts were alive, then there was no need for Wu-Ming to save them. So Wu-Ming just gave them food and water, and a few words of advice, and let them leave. Wu-Ming still remembered that when Wu-Ming gave the refugees food, their eyes revealed a look of disbelief. Maybe in their eyes, Wu-Ming just wanted to get some information and then kill them all. Because many of their companions were killed by the knights. The desire to live stimulated them, making them know that they would die later, but they still hoped to die later. So they told Wu-Ming the information he wanted to know. But Wu-Ming gave them food and water in the end. However, Wuming felt that the refugees were surprised by his identity, the questions, information, and the food and water he gave out. These things were incompatible with this era, and they were filled with a strange aura. After all, I'm not from this era. Shrugging his shoulders, Wuming no longer thought about the refugees. Instead, he reflected on the information they provided to Wuming. According to the refugees' intelligence, the Crusaders had obtained great strength and were constantly advancing towards the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Then, just as they were about to conquer Jerusalem, a desert suddenly appeared in the west, and the Crusaders suddenly weakened. Then, the Crusaders were chased down by the people of the Holy Land. This was undoubtedly good news for the refugees. At that time, a strong man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie I suddenly appeared. With unprecedented strength, he annexed the original Crusader army and the Holy Land of Jerusalem in one fell swoop, directly unifying the other areas except for the desert in the west. However, Charles I, who was known as the Lionheart King, was more like a devil than a human. A devil that caused the surrounding residents to fear. Whether it was the unimaginable tyranny or the cruel means of toying with people's hearts, the residents suffered greatly. Although there were some who tried to resist, they failed in an instant. According to the refugee, he was fortunate enough to see the Lionheart King once. The Lionheart King's entire body was emitting a dark aura. Just one look at him was enough to make people feel despair. The refugees could only use 2 words to describe him: demon. Wuming could undoubtedly judge that the man who called himself the Lionheart King Charlie was a servant. However, this was completely different from the character of Charlie that Wuming knew from history. Could it be that a servant with the chaos evil attribute had impersonated Charlie I? Wuming had such doubts at that time. However, Wuming didn't have to continue to think about it, because the refugees told him that the Lionheart King Charlie was defeated. The strong man called the Lion King led the existence of the Knights of the Round Table. After a hard battle, they defeated the Lionheart King Charlie I, who was comparable to the demon, and ended the terrifying tyranny of the Lionheart King in a very short time. However, the rule of the Lionheart King who replaced the Lionheart King was not any better than the Lionheart King. The Lionheart King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the battered holy city of Jerusalem, and then drove out all the residents and completely blocked Camelot. And announced to the public that the holy selection would be held regularly, and the selected people would enter the holy city and start a carefree life. And these refugees who wandered in the wasteland and became inhuman did not participate in the holy selection because the people who went to participate in the holy selection did not come back. There were a lot of people who went to participate in the holy selection. Although the refugees did not know the specific number, they knew that the holy city could not accommodate so many people. But none of those people came back. Thinking of this, Wuming sighed. Were they killed? After all, the people who went did not come back, and the holy city could not accommodate so many people. The only possibility was that they were massacred. Wuming's first reaction was disbelief, and then he began to have doubts. Merlin told Wuming that the Lion King was undoubtedly King Arthur Artoria, and the Knights of the Round Table were probably those people that Wuming was familiar with. If it was them, they would not have massacred, but if those people were not King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table that Wuming was familiar with, then it was not impossible for them to massacre the people who participated in the holy selection. The suspected servant named Lionheart was different from the original Lionheart, and it was hard to guarantee that King Arthur would not change. No, it should be said that there was already a change, otherwise, why would he call himself the Lion King and not King Arthur? All in all, he still needed to investigate. Apart from this, the refugees had no other information. Wuming did not suspect that the refugees were hiding anything. Their eyes had already told Wuming that they had told him everything they knew. Moreover, even though these refugees were locals, they were still narrow-minded. Do you expect ordinary farmers to know state secrets? It was obviously unrealistic. So, not only did Wuming need to find out about the Lion King, but he also needed to investigate the other forces, and most importantly, Wuming needed to find Gadotzi. After all, Wuming's main purpose was to help Gadotzi repair the singularity. Because Gadotzi had tried to summon Wuming, Wuming was sure that Gadotzi and the others were in the singularity, but the specific location was difficult to find. Because of the incomplete authority link, Wuming could not search for too much information in the root. If he could achieve omniscience, then he was not far away from authority, and Wuming did not need to come here in person. He could have removed the singularity from the root. If he could do that, a mere Gidea would not be a problem. Shaking his head, Wuming threw the unrealistic thought out of his mind. Then, Wuming looked at the desert in the west, and then Wuming looked at the holy city in the east. Then, Wuming stepped forward and headed toward his chosen destination. Chapter 670. Wuming chose the direction of the east, and he decided to go directly to the Lion King. The biggest reason why he didn't go to the desert in the west was still unknown. Through the information provided by the refugees, Wuming could infer a lot of things. The Holy Grail was held by the Crusaders at the beginning, which was consistent with, they suddenly gained great power. Because they were not satisfied with their current power, the Crusaders made a gamble. They summoned a powerful servant. In the end, they lost the bet and lost everything. The servant betrayed them, and after snatching the Holy Grail, he summoned the entire desert here. After that, as the refugees said before, the Crusaders suddenly became weak, and then they were chased by the people of the Holy Land. Without the power of the Holy Grail, the Crusaders who couldn't beat Jerusalem became a paper tiger. After that, because the Holy Grail was in this era, some servants were summoned one after another. The Lionheart King Charlie was likely to be one of the servants summoned by nature. Due to an unknown secret, the Lionheart King did not become a brutal demon dweller like what was recorded in the history books. He annexed the Crusaders and the Holy Land, and fought against the servant in the desert. However, at this time, the Holy Grail summoned a new servant, the Lion King. The Lion King led the Knights of the Round Table to defeat the Lionheart King Charlie. The Lion King built a new holy city, Camelot, on the holy city of Jerusalem, which was affected by the attack on the Lionheart King and turned into ruins. The situation became like this now: the Lion King and the desert powerhouse were at the bottom of the pit. In Wuming's view, the servant summoned by the Crusaders was a pharaoh. Wuming could feel that the desert in the west was similar to the existence of an inherent enchantment, plus the ability to summon the entire desert was comparable to an inherent enchantment. Except for the pharaoh in Egypt, Wuming really couldn't think of anyone else who could have such an abnormal ability. After all, the pharaoh in Egypt was said to be a god. As a servant, the pharaoh was likely to be deified by this legend and have great power. The other party's information was completely unknown, and because of the enchantment, even if Wuming entered the desert, he could not effectively find Gadotzi. In short, Wuming was not prepared to get into trouble before he figured out who the owner of the desert was. Therefore, Wuming only had one choice left, and that was to go to the Lion King's side. Through Wuming's authority in the root, he knew that the singularity was on the verge of collapsing. If he continued to walk in a certain direction, he would find that there was no path left. This singularity was starting to break away from the timeline. It was like the singularity of the American continent. Beyond the singularity was a void. However, the final outcome of this singularity could be even worse. Compared to the American continent, which would become a new space independent of the timeline, this singularity would eventually collapse completely. The reason why the collapse of the human race in this singularity was so severe was actually because of the desert and the new holy city. The desert had the same effect as the fixed boundary. The fixed boundary interfered with the real world with a time limit, while the desert interfered with the real world without a time limit. The interference with the world had accelerated the collapse of the singularity. But even so, the singularity shouldn't have collapsed to this extent. So, the only reason left was the Lion King. Although Wu-Ming did not get much information from the root, the collapse of the singularity still pointed to the Lion King. If I want to save this singularity, Tachika and the others will definitely go there. After all, if he wanted to restore humanity, he had to defeat the culprit who destroyed humanity. And now, the Lion King was the culprit. So, Wu-Ming decided to wait for Godotzi to arrive at the Lion King's side. At the same time, Wu-Ming could also go and see what had happened to Artoria. Wu-Ming took off his magical armor and put on a tattered cloak that he created using a high-tier item. Because the armor was not a noble artifact, it was dispensable to Wu-Ming. So, Wu-Ming cancelled the armor. And this way, he could also hide Wu-Ming's identity as a Knight of the Round Table. Based on how the refugees treated the Knights of the Round Table, Wu-Ming did not think that the Knights of the Round Table were very popular here. Just like that, Wu-Ming pretended to be a refugee who wanted to go to the new holy city for the Holy Ascension. Stepping on the ground, Wu-Ming walked toward the holy city step by step. However, the scenery along the way made Wu-Ming frown. Along the way, although the surroundings were not as deserted as the place where Wu-Ming had just arrived, the land that Wu-Ming saw along the way was not much better. As if it had experienced a natural disaster, many places on the ground were cracked. The lack of water made Wu-Ming unable to see any flowers or trees at all, except for a large piece of bare land. Wu-Ming occasionally came across places that looked like villages, but there were still no signs of life there, which disappointed Wu-Ming. None of the simple mud houses were intact. Basically, they were all so damaged that they were uninhabitable. There were no traces of human habitation around these houses. It was as if they had been abandoned for 100 years. There were some villages that seemed to have only been abandoned for a short period of time, but there were still no signs of life. I hope it's just my bad luck. Wu-Ming comforted himself. Wu-Ming felt uneasy that he could not meet anyone. If the humans in this singularity disappeared, it basically meant that there was no hope. The reason why Chaldea could save humanity, apart from Chaldea's uniqueness, was that there were humans in the singularity. It was because of such a small spark that Chaldea could turn this small spark into a big fire and finally let the fire of humanity envelop the entire earth. Apart from the humans, at the beginning, Wu-Ming didn't encounter any other living beings along the way. He didn't even see any living plants. Wu-Ming did encounter a lot of monster-like beasts, but when they attacked Wu-Ming, they were all killed by Wu-Ming. Other than that, Wu-Ming also found some mysterious craters. The craters were of different sizes. The largest had a diameter of a few kilometers, and the smallest had a diameter of tens of meters. These craters looked like meteorite craters, and there were traces of burns left behind. But how could there be so many meteorites falling? Standing at the edge of a crater, Wu-Ming half-squatted and touched the ground of the crater. If it's Lily, she really does have a relic that can create such a crater, the legendary weapon, the anchor that connected the two sides of the world, the Holy Lance Longaminiad. If it had been a legendary weapon, it would have been possible to create so many holes of different sizes. But why would Lily use the Holy Lance so often? Wu-Ming wondered. Could it be that Artoria wanted to loosen the soil? How could that be? Wait. Wu-Ming suddenly thought of an unbelievable idea. Then, Wu-Ming ignored his hiding and flew up into the sky. Wu-Ming flew to a high altitude and looked down. Then, Wu-Ming's face changed. Chapter 671. Wu-Ming landed from the sky with a gloomy face. His guess was right again. The giant pits of a few kilometers in size were distributed irregularly. In Wu-Ming's view, it was likely that Artoria used the Holy Lance on Lionheart's troops. This was not a big problem, but the other pits that were not too big were quite big problems. Wu-Ming looked down from the sky. The positions of these giant pits were suitable for building villages, and the size was completely suitable. So, the predecessor of these giant pits was a village distributed on this land. Because the Holy Lands continued to destroy the villages, the villagers who were lucky enough to survive had nowhere to go. They could only wander around, or go to the new holy city to participate in the holy selection to see if they could enter the holy city to live a good life. What? Why would the villagers go to the forces that destroyed their homes? Wasn't this obvious? Because the villagers who survived did not know the people who destroyed their homes in the new holy city. The light beam that destroyed the villages was probably just regarded as divine punishment. However, Wuming also encountered a lot of villages that had just begun to be abandoned. Why would these villagers abandon their villages and leave? Was it because there was no food, or because they were afraid of divine punishment, or because they were forced to leave? I lack information. Wuming shook his head. However, the limited information made Wuming understand why he could never meet humans. Although Wuming had previously guessed that the villagers on this land were eaten by the wild beasts that were quite powerful for ordinary people, this guess was now overturned. Camelot became the holy city, King Arthur became the Lion King. What happened in the end? What changed? Wuming looked in the direction of the holy city uneasily. After that, Wuming continued to move and set off in the direction of the holy city. Wuming found that the closer he got to the holy city, the fewer beasts he encountered before. Wuming even encountered a team of patrolling knights. Looking at the equipment of the knights, it was somewhat similar to the Knights of Camelot, but Wuming did not think that they were the Knights of Camelot. They were the knights of the new holy city, Camelot, not the Camelot city of Great Britain Island. However, because Wuming hid, he was not discovered by the knights. Wuming was now more and more suspicious of the new holy city, so he decided to hide and see the situation first. After taking a slightly longer detour, Wuming disguised himself as a traveler who had come from a faraway place and was disturbed by the chaos of war. Because of the detour, Wuming was lucky to encounter a few humans. Fortunately, those humans also encountered Wuming. This was because they had encountered many strange beasts and monsters that Wuming had killed before. Wuming lent a helping hand and struggled to take care of the beast. In the end, he pretended to be seriously injured. He wanted to see if these humans still had hearts. Once again, it was fortunate that although these humans looked extremely thin and battered, they still retained their hearts. These humans were grateful to Wuming. After that, they said that they wanted to go to the holy city. If Wuming was willing, they could take care of the injured Wuming. Therefore, Wuming gladly joined the team. Wuming chatted with the leader of these people. The leader was constantly grateful to Wuming. After all, if it were not for Wuming, they would have been killed by the Soul Eater beast. The Soul Eater beast referred to the monster that Wuming killed. Such a monster was said to be the emissary of hell. It would kill humans and eat their souls, so it was called the Soul Eater beast. However, the Soul Eater beast was only a type of creature that was passed down in this area. Such a monster had never appeared before. After the strange creature that Wuming killed appeared, it was treated as a Soul Eater beast. However, when Wuming said something like, "Aren't you afraid of being eaten?" the humans looked helpless. If it weren't for the fact that we can't survive, who would go to the holy city to participate in the saint selection? Being eaten or starving to death made no difference to them. It seemed that they also knew that those who went to participate in the saint selection did not return. It was precisely because they could not survive that they accepted dying on the way. They only went to the saint selection to try their luck. After all, they would starve to death if they did not gamble. As they gradually approached the holy city, Wuming and the others did not encounter any danger. However, Wuming obtained some information from the leader of these people. In the mountains of the distant north, the assassin order called the Old Man of the Mountain was still active. Wuming, who was familiar with the Holy Grail War, naturally knew of the existence of the Old Man of the Mountain because the assassin of the 7 classes in the Holy Grail War referred to the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Sabah. Normally, as long as the assassin class was summoned, the possibility of summoning Hassan was 99%. Because Hassan and the assassin class had a lot to do with each other, the name of this class was equivalent to a holy relic. Therefore, if one wanted to summon an assassin that was not Hassan, one could only use a special holy relic or method to do so. If one were to look at it from a normal perspective, Hassan was actually very strong. As for the organization of the Old Man of the Mountain, their leader of each generation was called Hassan Sabah. The Hassans shaved their faces and wore bone masks to hide their true identities. Each generation of Hassan mastered a skill that others could not imitate or learn. In the eyes of ordinary people and even magicians, they were extremely dangerous existences. However, the dangerous existences to humans were in an awkward position in the Holy Grail War. Because of their low basic ability value, the Hassans could hardly fight head-on with the other 6 classes. They could only rely on sneak attacks to their masters. Of course, because the Hassans had all kinds of strange noble phantoms, they were not completely defeated. After all, the noble phantoms were miraculous things that could turn the tide of defeat. Just like the Assassin class card that Wu Ming once used, because the Assassin class card stored the spiritual base of the 19th generation Hassan, different Hassan abilities would be obtained after using it according to different users. The Hassan that Wu Ming used was the 19th generation Cursed Wrist Hassan. One of his arms was the arm of the demon god, which was the arm of the curse that could crush people's hearts. Even if it was a servant, if they were accidentally hit by this attack, they would have to leave the stage. Anyway, all in all, Wu Ming obtained a piece of information. There was a suspected assassin order in the northern mountains, which was the Old Man of the Mountain, Hassan Sabah. In this way, it could be regarded as a tripartite balance of forces. While thinking, Wu Ming found that they had arrived at their scheduled destination, the new holy city of Camelot. Chapter 672. A small number of refugees gathered in the open space in front of the holy city gate. There were about 100 or 200 of them. Among these 200 people, some of them had thin cloth placed beside them. Those were their beds. It seemed that many people had arrived here in advance, and it seemed that they had been living here for a long time. Fortunately, this place had become a singularity, and it was not so cold at night. Otherwise, these people would have frozen to death with just the thin cloth. However, Wu Ming was now thinking about one thing. Was he going to freeze here too? However, the heavens once again favored Wu Ming. The gate of the holy city opened. It seemed that Wu Ming had just arrived at the beginning of the holy ascension. The ability to double his luck in an instant was not for show. Seeing the gate of the holy city open, the refugees who had been waiting for a long time gathered together. Even the refugees who came with Wu Ming could not suppress the excitement in their hearts at this moment. They staggered into the crowd. Wu Ming naturally had to act more realistic, so he quickly walked toward the refugees. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming looked at the open gate of the holy city. A golden-haired man wearing pure white armor with a sword hanging from his waist walked out with a team of fully armed knights. The sword on the man's waist gave people the feeling of facing the sun. However, this comparison was correct because the sacred sword was the sister sword of King Arthur's sacred sword, Excalibur. It was called the Excalibur Victory Sword. The golden-haired man was none other than Gawain, the man who held the sword and was known as the Sun Knight. Wu Ming sighed. He had to admit that he could not greet an old friend he had not seen for a long time, and they might even become enemies in the future. Wu Ming once again felt helpless. Although becoming a servant gave heroes a chance to make up for their regrets, it was more of a helplessness brought about by the encounter across the timeline. Gawain, who had become a Lion King Knight, was no longer the noble Sun Knight. Wu Ming guessed that the disappearance of the refugees who came to the holy city for the holy ascension was related to Gawain. However, Gawain's next words confirmed Wu Ming's suspicions. Everyone, I, Gawain, will still be conducting the saint uplifting ceremony this time. Everyone, please settle down. Next, I will explain the things you need to take note of during the saint uplifting ceremony. Gawain waved his hand, and the knights standing behind Gawain began to move. In just a few seconds, the knights had surrounded Wu Ming's group of refugees. It looked like they were about to perform an important ceremony. However, this scene made Wu Ming frown involuntarily. In this way, if these knights wanted to do anything to these refugees, these unarmed refugees who were in a sorry state due to their haste to travel would become fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. When the saint uplifting ceremony begins, the tallest tower in the holy city will emit holy light. At that time, the bodies of the selected people will glow. These selected people have the purest hearts. Next, they will have the right to enter the holy city and live a carefree life. As for those who are not selected, their impure hearts will make them lose the right to enter the holy city. That's the rule. Do you all understand? Although Gawain's last sentence was a question, the refugees did not make a sound, or rather, they did not dare to make a sound. And Gawain seemed to be familiar with the refugees' behavior of not daring to speak, so the question he asked just now was just a routine. Next, it was time for the saint uplifting ceremony. The saint uplifting ceremony begins. At Gawain's command, the tower in the center of the holy city of Camello emitted a light. This light made him look like a laser. He instantly arrived at the entrance of the holy city and shone on the refugees. The sudden change caused a commotion among the refugees. They began to check in a panic to see if their bodies were glowing, to see if they had obtained the right to enter the holy city and start a new life. However, most people's bodies were not glowing. There was not even the slightest change. However, most people discovered that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. This frightened the refugees. There were so many of them, but only 3 or 4 of them were qualified to enter the holy city. Wasn't this saying that they were all dirty people on the inside? Those who had done many bad things frowned in dissatisfaction. When they heard that only those with pure hearts were qualified to enter the holy city, they no longer held any hope. They just wanted to try their luck. As for those who had not done any bad things and thought that they were pure but were not selected, they were devastated. This was the same as saying, you think you're a god, but in fact, you're not even a fart. It made people feel helpless, sad. However, Gawain did not show any surprise when he saw that there were only 3 or 4 people whose bodies were glowing. It was as if this was the number of people selected in each saint uplifting ceremony. Next, those who were not selected would be left to them to deal with. On Wu Ming's side, he was wearing a shabby cloak. His whole body was glowing, and he kept a distance from the people around him. However, Wu Ming was clearly not a human. He was clearly a ghost-like follower. How could he be selected? The mandatory condition to be selected by the light was that he was a human. In fact, when he saw the light emitted from the top of the tower, Wu Ming secretly used some means and tricks to capture part of the light. As Wu Ming expected, the light was emitted by the holy spear. Wu Ming's current spiritual base was indeed unable to face the holy spear head-on. However, Wu Ming still had a way to steal the light from those with pure hearts. It was because of this that Wu Ming's ghost was qualified to enter the holy city. The people around Wu Ming isolated Wu Ming. That was not Wu Ming's doing. After all, Wu Ming had to enter the holy city. It would be great if he could enter without causing a commotion. Therefore, Wu Ming did not need to make himself so conspicuous. The people around him only subconsciously distanced themselves from Wu Ming when they saw Wu Ming's body glowing. The selected Wu Ming was no longer like them. He was no longer a human like them. He was a real human. Therefore, the people around him subconsciously distanced themselves from the alien. The other selected people whose bodies began to glow were the same. The people around them subconsciously distanced themselves from them. It was also because the other selected people had the same experience as Wu Ming that Wu Ming did not do anything out of line. Unlike Wu Ming, who was unusually calm, the people who were alienated all looked uneasy and nervous. At this moment, Gawain spoke. "Congratulations, you've been selected. You have the right to enter the holy city and start a new life." Then, Gawain opened up a path and pointed at the door behind him. "Now, you may enter." However, the selected people, including Wu Ming, did not move. Or rather, other than Wu Ming, they did not know what to do. Gawain did not mind and waited quietly. Then, one of the selected people spoke. Can't I enter with my family?" However, Gawain's reply was a cruel Gawain. "Unfortunately, you can't." Chapter 673. Those who aren't chosen aren't qualified to enter the holy city. Also, as you can see, your family left you when you were chosen. You don't have to think about them at all. Go to the holy city and live the happy life you deserve, Gao Wenshao explained to the person who asked the question with both reason and emotion. However, that person still couldn't bear it and couldn't make a decision. On the other hand, the other people who were chosen didn't hesitate and strode toward the gate of the holy city. Wu Ming looked at the person who was still hesitating with interest. This person was the leader, who had accompanied Wu Ming all the way here and talked to Wu Ming. His family, who were the people who came with Wu Ming, lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at their chosen relative. These people felt guilty because they subconsciously retreated just now. After hesitating for a while, the chosen person sighed helplessly and walked toward the gate of the holy city. Finally, Gawain looked at the last chosen person who didn't move. It was Wu Ming, who was wearing a tattered cloak and whose face couldn't be seen clearly. "Then, why don't you go in?" Gawain asked. Upon hearing Gawain's words, Wu Ming walked toward Gawain step by step. When the surrounding refugees saw Wu Ming walking toward Gawain, they consciously made way for him. Gawain didn't stop Wu Ming in any way. The chosen people were precious, and they were all worth waiting for. In the end, Wu Ming came in front of Gawain, while the refugees came behind Wu Ming. "I have a question," Wu Ming said to Gawain in a slightly different voice. Gawain frowned. He listened to this person's voice and looked at this figure. He felt that this person was somewhat familiar. "Please speak." However, no matter what, this person was a chosen person with a pure heart. Even Gawain, who had become extremely dirty now, wouldn't ignore the voices of these pure hearts just because his body and soul were impure. This was because all of this was the king's orders. "If I go in, what will happen to the rest of the people?" Wu Ming finally asked the crucial question. Gawain frowned and said helplessly, "The knights will be killed. The Knights of Solemnity will kill them all." The Knights of Solemnity were referring to the fully armed knights who had surrounded the refugees. Even the filthy Gawain was still an upright knight. He would never lie. However, Gawain's words caused a huge uproar among the refugees. However, Gawain worried that his honesty would change the fate of the refugees because these sinners would never leave this place alive. After the holy purification, those who weren't chosen were sinners. Gawain's orders, and he only had to carry out the orders. "Why?" Wu Ming continued asking. However, this time, Wu Ming used his own voice. "WH. Are you finally responding to the king's order?" Gawain was taken aback. He hurriedly performed a knight's salute to Wu Ming. This left the Knights of Solemnity at a loss. They didn't understand why Sir Gawain was so respectful to this person. Although the chosen ones were worthy of respect, there was no need to be so respectful. The refugees were also interested in Wu Ming, who was suddenly respected by Gawain. However, it seemed like they should be thinking about how to escape from the encirclement of the Knights of Solemnity. After all, to these sinners, staying alive was the most important thing. "I'm not responding to the king. I'm responding to the fated one of the heroic spirits, the last master of mankind," Tachika Fujimaru of Chaldea. Wuming calmly retorted Gawain. Then, are you also preparing to rebel against the king, Sir Villo? Gawain's tone was still very respectful even though he was questioning Gawain. The word also made Wuming frown. It seemed like there was an unknown past behind this. However, Wuming didn't answer his question. Let's make a bet, Gawain, Wuming said with a smile. If I win, I'll let them leave. If I lose, I'll kill them with my own hands. Then, I'll follow you to meet the king and pledge my loyalty to her again. Gawain straightened his body and looked at Wuming with an "I'm very upright" expression. You know, Sir Villo. Knights don't gamble. However, back in Camelot, whenever Wuming wanted to make a bet with someone for fun, Gawain would always look eager to try. But in order to get you back on the right path, I'm willing to make a bet with you. Gawain looked like he was going to die a martyr's death. This moved the knights who didn't know what was going on. However, these knights probably didn't even know what the bet was. However, Wuming smiled proudly. Aren't you going to ask me what the bet is, Gawain? For the king, no matter what you want to bet with me, I'll agree to it. Gawain shook his head. Good. Wuming yelled. Then, he grabbed the corner of his cloak and pulled. Apart from the helmet, a fully armed silver dragon knight with a red cloak appeared in front of Gawain. It's great to see you again, Sir Villo. Seeing Wuming's familiar face, Gawain gave him a heartfelt blessing. However, Wuming ignored Gawain's greeting. Instead, he pointed at the refugees behind him. In that case, let them go. Wuming's words confused Gawain. Didn't he say that he would only let them go if he lost the bet? Why did he suddenly ask him to let them go? I bet on whether you would agree to the bet, and I won, Wuming said shamelessly to Gawain. This. Gawain was speechless for a moment. However, he had forgotten that back in Camelot, as a knight, Silent Cry was good at everything, but sometimes he would act a little shamelessly, especially when he made a bet with others, and it was the kind that made people unable to refute. Gawain indeed didn't ask what the bet was, and he even said that as long as Wuming proposed it, he would agree to the bet. In the end, who would have thought that Wuming and Gawain would bet on whether Gawain would accept Wuming's bet, as expected of you, Sir Villo. You did win, but, however, before Gawain could finish, Wuming interrupted him. This is a bet with my king. Don't tell me you want to go back on your word, Gawain. You're right. Let them go. Gawain smiled helplessly, then gave the order to the Knights of Solemnity. Although the Knights of Solemnity were a little confused, they were very obedient as they strictly adhered to the Knights' principles. Therefore, the Knights opened up a gap for the refugees to leave. When the refugees saw the hope of survival, how could they care about anything else? They scrambled and crawled away through the gap. Did you see that, Sir Villo? They didn't even say a word of thanks to you. Are these sinners worth saving? However, Wuming nodded. Yes. Chapter 674. In the beginning, Wuming's goal was to help Gadotsi save the Singularity. But when Wuming learned that the Lion King in this Singularity was no longer the Artoria he knew, Wuming decided that he must come and see what happened to Artoria. The reason why Wuming captured the beam of Holy Selection Light was to make it easier for him to sneak into the city. However, Wuming guessed what Gawain was going to do next. Coincidentally, although Wuming was not a saint, Wuming was not the kind of person who would leave someone in the lurch. Moreover, this was also to save the Singularity. If he wanted to ensure that the Singularity could be successfully saved, there had to be humans in the Singularity, not to mention that the Singularity had already begun to collapse. The more humans there were, the more advantageous it would be for the Singularity that had already begun to collapse. After all, this way, the Singularity's collapse would be delayed, and Gadotsi and the others would have more time. Therefore, Wuming chose to expose himself and let the refugees escape. Although he did not know if the refugees could find a safe place, their fates were no longer in Wuming's hands. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, it was up to fate. However, Gawain shook his head at Wuming, who nodded in affirmation. Sir Villo, even if I let those refugees go, they might not be able to leave alive. They might be eaten by those beasts. You must know that there are more mutated beasts in the wild here than just the soul-eating beast. As the Lion King's close vassal, Gawain knew some secrets. The Solemn Knights had the ability to completely eliminate the surrounding beasts, but Egwene deliberately ordered the Solemn Knights not to take action. His purpose was to keep the beasts and clean up the extra, dirty humans. Because there were too many humans in this singularity, and there were not many humans who could be chosen by the Holy Lance, Egwene kept the wild beasts and let them clean up the humans. Everything was for the king's sake, so Gawain, who knew the truth, did not object. If the refugees encountered wild beasts, there would definitely be casualties. If they were not careful, they might even be wiped out. Don't think that they would be able to leave safely just because they were able to reach the holy city. Gawain was certain that the total number of people who had come to the holy city for the saint selection was definitely more than 100 or 200. So where did the rest go? If they weren't eaten by wild beasts, they would die on the way due to various reasons such as hunger and fatigue. These people who were able to participate in the saint selection had come to the holy city through the sacrifice of others. Of course, there were also people who were lucky, such as the few people who met Wuming. They didn't encounter any danger along the way. After encountering danger, they met Wuming, so they arrived here safely. Therefore, even if Gawain spared those 200 people, they might not be able to leave alive. Moreover, if I report the news of the refugees leaving, Minister Ejegu will definitely send Minister Drizzt or Minister Mordred after them. Don't ask Gawain why he knew. In the past, there were many people who escaped, and those people were killed by Drizzt or Mordred. However, when Wuming heard Gawain's words, he couldn't help but frown. What did you just say? Why is Ejegu the one who gave the order? Where is the king? Ever since we defeated Lionheart, the king has been sleeping. But don't worry, the king chose to sleep to replenish his mana. Gawain was afraid that Wuming was worried that something had happened to Artoria, so he patiently answered. That was indeed the case. After hearing Gawain's words, Wuming's furrowed brows relaxed. If that was the case, then there was nothing that could be done. Compared to being a general, Ejegu was actually more suited to be a civil official. When Artoria or Wuming were not in Camelot, he was always conscientious and meticulous in giving the correct orders. Even though Agrippa's orders were so strict that they couldn't be more strict, even impartial couldn't fully describe Agrippin. In addition, Ager Regulus almost never smiled, which led to his nickname of Iron Ager Regulus. However, Wuming was once again worried. With Ejegu's loyalty to Artoria, he naturally wouldn't harm her, but he wasn't so kind to others. It could be said that if he had to choose between Artoria and the Knights of the Round Table, and only one of them could survive, Ejegu would abandon the Knights of the Round Table without hesitation and choose Artoria. In fact, he would even abandon himself when necessary. All of this was for the sake of the king. Wuming, who was familiar with almost everyone in the Knights of the Round Table, was sure that Ejegu was more loyal to Artoria than anyone else. This guy was definitely a die-hard fan. Of course, if it was back in Camelot, it wouldn't be a problem. However, this was not Great Nightingale Island, nor was it Camelot on Great Nightingale Island. This was the new holy city built on the ruins of the holy city of Jerusalem. Wuming finally understood why the refugees were so afraid of Wuming's identity as a Knight of the Round Table. Ejegu was probably the reason. Artoria rarely dealt with political affairs due to her deep sleep, and Ejegu, who handled things for Artoria, was incomparably strict. Everything he was doing now was probably for the sake of the holy baptism, and the holy baptism was probably Artoria's order. In addition to Gawain's personality, Wuming felt that the current Knights of the Round Table might no longer be King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, but the Lion King's Knights of the Round Table. Shaking his head, Wuming looked at Gawain. "Gawain, let's make a deal." After hearing that Wuming wasn't proposing another bet, Gawain didn't immediately agree. Instead, he shook his head. "This time, I want to hear the contents of the deal first, Lord Villo. I'll go with you to see my king. Tell me what happened between my king and the Knights of the Round Table in this singularity." After thinking about Wuming's words, Gawain nodded and agreed. However, Wuming directly revealed his identity to persuade Artoria. It could be said that Gawain was once again tricked by Wuming, and he even gave away information. The gate of the Holy City closed, and the Knights of Solemnity returned to the Holy City. Gawain explained to Wuming what happened after he came to this singularity, while leading Wuming to the tallest tower in the center of the new Holy City of Camelot. Listening to Gawain's explanation, Wuming raised his head and looked at the tower. Artoria was inside. Chapter 675. Even if they were just ordinary friends, after not seeing each other for a long time, they would still feel a lot of emotions when they were about to meet again. Moreover, Artoria was Wuming's first love. After being apart for so many years, Wuming was a little excited when he was about to meet Artoria again. "Sir Villo! Sir Villo, are you listening?" Gawain shouted a few times, calling back Wuming, who was distracted. "Sorry, Gawain. I missed the days when I was with my king," Wuming said apologetically. "It's all right, Sir Villo. When we see our king again, we're also very excited," Gawain replied with a smile. He didn't think it was wrong to be distracted because of his king. In fact, those who couldn't be distracted because of his king didn't deserve to be called Knights of the Round Table. In fact, Gawain was also a die-hard fan, but not as serious as Agrawain. Where were you just now?" Wuming nodded and motioned for Gawain to continue. "I was just talking about our final crusade against the demons." At this point, Gawain's eyes dimmed a little, but they recovered in an instant. The observant Wuming naturally caught the moment when Gawain's eyes dimmed, and Wuming read the sadness in Gawain's eyes. Although the demons were very strong, there was no enemy that our king and the Knights of the Round Table couldn't defeat. "We successfully killed the Lionheart King. Who sacrificed themselves? Gaholis or Gareth?" Wuming asked directly after Gawain finished speaking. This made Wuming look very cruel at the moment. Both Gareth and Gaholis were Gawain's family. It was Gareth. Gawain was silent for a few seconds before answering Wuming. "That little girl," Wuming said calmly. "I remember that she worships me and Lancelot a lot. To be honest, I still want to meet her. Back in Camelot, she gave me a lot of gifts," Wuming said as if he was reminiscing. Wuming did not pity Gareth because that would be an insult to a knight. "I killed her with my own hands," Gawain suddenly said. Wuming was stunned and turned to look at Gawain. What the hell is going on? He thought that Gareth had died in battle, but the result surprised Wuming. But now that he thought about it, there were many loopholes in Gawain's words. Although Gawain said that most of the knights had died in the battle against the Lionheart King's army, powerful knights like Guy, Percival, and Lomark shouldn't have died so easily. "You lied, didn't you, Gawain?" Wuming looked at Gawain solemnly. "I'm sorry, Lord Villo. I just didn't want you to see our dirty side." Gawain saluted Wuming apologetically. "I've already seen how dirty you are in front of the city gate. There's no need to hide it." Wuming was a little angry. "Tell me the truth." After Wuming finished, Gawain nodded and started from the beginning again. After the Lionheart King descended to this singularity, she summoned most of the Knights of the Round Table by herself. Except for 3 knights who did not accept the summons, basically all the knights of the Round Table were present. Wu Ming was not surprised that the knights of the Round Table were not present. After all, he and Galahad, who possessed Matthew, could not respond to the king's summons. But who else did not accept the king's summons? Without waiting for Wu Ming to think, Gawain continued. The king told us that because the master of Chaldea has not arrived, this singularity is about to collapse. Therefore, the king has decided to use the Holy Lance for redemption. She would store the pure-hearted people as specimens into the Holy Lance. This way, even if this singularity was destroyed and the entire human race was burned to ashes, humanity would not be destroyed. Because she used the Holy Lance to preserve the human race. After that, the Lionheart King did not use the form of an order, but told the knights something in the form of an equal conversation. She said this, "I've gathered all of you because this plan requires your strength. Although I can annihilate the enemy alone, I can't carry out the consecration. I need the knights as my brothers. But you have to know that this will not be compatible with the creed of all of you. Either obey me, leave me, or gather the power of all of you to defeat me. Give me your answer at sunset. I'll wait until then." Kai Ching instantly stood on the opposite side of the king, and Gahoris also did not hesitate to stand in the camp against the king. Gawain said. His eyes were a little dim, but he recovered in an instant. "Because of me and Lancelot, Gareth stood on our side. In other words, before the knights of the Round Table dealt with the Lionheart King, they first killed each other." Wu Ming closed his eyes, feeling a little uncomfortable. Humans were not plants and could not be emotionless. Wu Ming had lived with the Knights of the Round Table for more than 10 years, and if he had to say, the Knights of the Round Table came to the king's side one by one under Wu Ming's watch. Wu Ming could say that he knew them like the back of his hand. When they killed each other, their hearts must have been more uncomfortable than Wu Ming now. Then, as if to prove his inner determination, Gawain looked at Wu Ming without the slightest hint of avoidance. "We killed our compatriots who wanted to stop the king and were stained with the blood of our compatriots. We who have decided to enter hell can bear it, but Gareth is not like us." Gawain shook his head. Her pure heart could not bear such pain. In the end, Gareth used his battered body and hands that were no longer pure white to break down and shed tears. He sacrificed himself to control the Lionheart King. "In the end, I killed Gareth and the demon with my sword." Gawain finished speaking, but Wu Ming could understand that the actual situation was definitely not as simple as Gawain said. Wu Ming could almost see the scene of the pure and kind little girl crying and begging others to kill her. Wu Ming could even imagine what the others were like at that time. Lancelot must have been hesitant. He could not accept killing Gareth again. Drizzt would probably just be sad, and Mordred would probably be irritable. Although Mordred was a rebellious knight, she still cared about the Knights of the Round Table. Mordred would probably shout something like, "We can kill this bastard without such a sacrifice." Agravain would probably draw his sword and prepare to stab the enemy and his compatriots together. After all, he himself knew that he was suitable to play the role of an evil person. However, Gawain took the initiative to attack first. Wu Ming did not know how Gawain felt when he swung his sword. Perhaps that swing of the sword also cut off Gawain's human emotions. In this way, Gawain was absolutely loyal to the Lion King. In this way, the Lion King's son knight was perfectly born. Just like the bet that Wu Ming proposed with Artoria, Gawain had no choice but to abide by it. Otherwise, it would be an insult to the king. "Is everything for the king, Gawain?" "Yes." "You don't regret it?" "Yes." "Then let's go. Take me to see the king, the one who is no longer a human." Chapter 676. After entering the tower and passing through a corridor guarded by knights, Wu Ming and Gawain arrived at a magnificent door. "Sir Villo, please take a rest inside. I'll gather the other knights of the Round Table in the Holy City." Gawain bowed to Wu Ming. Although Wu Ming's words seemed to be hostile toward the Lion King, Gawain would still respect Wu Ming as long as their relationship was not completely broken. "How many knights are not in the Holy City?" Wu Ming looked at the magnificent door and asked Gawain without looking back. "Only 2. Lancelot and Mordred are knights of the guerrilla force. They're both outside at the moment. Culistan is the one on standby in the city. Egwene is in charge of things in Steward Wang's place. I'm in charge of guarding the city gate." Wu Ming only asked who was not in the city, but Gawain answered all of them. However, the answer disappointed Wu Ming. "So there were only a few knights left," Wu Ming sighed. "No need to gather them. I only want to see the Lion King." Wu Ming shook his head. And after meeting the Lion King, there was no way to know whether they were friends or foes. Wu Ming was also grateful that Gawain had told Wu Ming about them. After all, if they became enemies in the end, this information would be very beneficial to Wu Ming. "Yes, please help yourself." Gawain bowed to Wu Ming and left. After all, his duty was to guard the city gate. Although it was unlikely that there would be an enemy attack, he still had to fulfill his duty. Seeing that Gawain had left, Wu Ming did not hesitate and pushed the door open. He decided that the moment he saw Artoria, he would give her a good scolding. "Sir Villo!" Accompanied by a joyful cry, a delicate body instantly pounced into Wu Ming's arms. Wu Ming subconsciously hugged the person who had thrown herself into his arms. Then, he took a closer look. She was a beautiful lady with fair skin and golden curly hair. "Guinevere. Why are you here?" That's right, the one who jumped into Wu Ming's arms was Guinevere, who had admired Wu Ming for a long time but couldn't be with him because of King Arthur. However, Guinevere did not answer Wu Ming. Instead, he hugged Wu Ming tightly and murmured, "Lord Villo, Guinevere misses you so much." Wu Ming didn't say anything else. He removed his armor and hugged Guinevere. Both of them enjoyed this moment of peace. Gradually, Guinevere stopped moving. Wu Ming took a closer look and saw that Guinevere had fallen asleep. "It must have been hard for you." Wu Ming touched Guinevere's cheek tenderly. Wu Ming had already experienced from my Fu how uncomfortable the feeling of not being able to be with the person he liked was. Not only Maeve, but Wu Ming also decided to give Artoria and Guinevere an answer. Wu Ming closed the door with his telekinesis and gently picked up the sleeping Guinevere. Then, he began to look around the room. Wu Ming wanted to see if there was a bed or something similar for Guinevere to rest. Coincidentally, this place seemed to be a bedroom. Is this Guinevere's bedroom? Then why did Gawain bring me here? Immediately after, Wu Ming suddenly recalled Gawain's smiling face. Wu Ming finally understood what Gawain meant by rest. That shouldn't be the case. My relationship with Guinevere shouldn't have been exposed. No, that's not right. There's nothing going on between Guinevere and me. Wu Ming quickly shook his head. Although the two of them had feelings for each other, they didn't do anything out of line until Wu Ming left. So how did Gawain know? Wu Ming shook his head. It didn't matter how he found out. He would find out later anyway. Wu Ming put Guinevere on the bed. But when he got up, Wu Ming found Guinevere clutching his arm tightly. After a helpless and doting sigh, Wu Ming sat down beside Guinevere's bed and let Guinevere hold his arm. Since he had nothing to do, Wu Ming began to meditate. Although meditation didn't have much effect on Wu Ming, it was still the accumulation of water that could penetrate a stone. After a while, Guinevere woke up. When he saw himself clutching Wu Ming's arm tightly, Guinevere was startled. "Sir Villo, I'm really sorry. I fell asleep." Guinevere immediately let go of Wu Ming's arm and stood up to apologize to Wu Ming. Wu Ming opened his eyes and turned to look at Guinevere, who sat up. "Don't mind it, Guinevere. After all, I also saw a painting of a sleeping beauty. Wu Ming's praise made Guinevere blush. Guinevere didn't dare to look at Wu Ming. Speaking of which, did you ask Gawain to bring me here? Wu Ming asked Guinevere. Guinevere was taken aback. He looked at Wu Ming with a sweet smile. As expected of Sir Villo. That's right. I asked Gao Wenqing to bring Sir Villo here. Although Wu Ming was puzzled by Gawain's actions, Wu Ming wasn't stupid. He understood after thinking about it carefully. Guinevere pounced on Wu Ming the moment he entered the door. If Gawain didn't know about the relationship between Wu Ming and Guinevere, then Gawain must have received someone's orders to bring Wu Ming here. I've already told Gao Wenqing that if Lord Varen comes here, he must bring him to me first. Furthermore, I've given this order to Gao Wenqing on behalf of my king. Then, Guinevere seemed to have thought of something and happily held on to Wu Ming's arm. After all, the king missed his subjects whom he hadn't seen for a long time. It wasn't a problem for him to meet them in advance. This explained Gawain's strange expression. When Gawain was alive, the relationship between Wu Ming and Artoria was so good that it didn't seem like a relationship between a king and his subjects. There is no Great Britain now, and the current king is very righteous. She allowed me to marry Sir Villo. Wu Ming was stunned. No matter how he thought about it, it didn't seem right. After all, Artoria was very strict about things like rules. Even if there was no Great Britain, she wouldn't allow her queen and her knight to be together. Otherwise, she wouldn't have chosen to execute Guinevere because of face. No, the current Artoria was no longer King Arthur. She was the Lion Queen that Wu Ming felt unfamiliar with. In other words, it wasn't strange that the current Artoria allowed Guinevere to be together. Guinevere, calm down. Listen to me. Wu Ming pulled Guinevere away from his arm, then pressed his hands on Guinevere's shoulders and looked into his eyes. I will give you and Lily an answer, but now isn't the time. Tell me, what happened to the king? Guinevere was quite happy to hear that he would be given an answer, but when he heard Wu Ming ask what happened to Artoria, Guinevere's expression became helpless. The king is no longer human. Chapter 677. I don't know the details. I only know that for some unknown reason, my king didn't die. Instead, he became the king of the undead who walked the earth and couldn't die. After all, Guinevere was Artoria's consort, so he had access to some things. Wu Ming had some guesses about the unknown reason that Guinevere mentioned. But the strange thing is that my king's body is different from before. If I have to say, my king has grown up. Guinevere pursed his lips in jealousy as he recalled the Lion King who was even more feminine than himself. Wu Ming naturally saw that Guinevere was jealous, so he immediately reached out and stroked Guinevere's little head. Guinevere was like a kitten, enjoying the touch of its master. Ah! By the way, my king no longer uses the holy sword, but the holy spear, Guinevere suddenly added. In Guinevere's opinion, the reason why she didn't use the holy sword was likely that it had been returned to the lake sprite. Lily's body will inevitably grow because neither the scabbard nor the holy sword will bless her anymore, Wu Ming explained to Guinevere as he put down his hand from Guinevere's head. Not only did the sword and the stone have a curse blessing on Artoria, but the scabbard, Avalon, and the holy sword, Excalibur, also had a curse blessing on Artoria. Her body couldn't grow because of the curse blessing brought by the sword and the stone. Although Artoria lost the sword and the stone, her body didn't start to grow because of the new holy sword and scabbard. On the other hand, the scabbard gave Artoria the blessing that she would never get hurt or grow old. Although the holy sword did not explicitly state it, in King Arthur's final story, King Arthur's broken body died after Bedivere completely returned the holy sword to him. Therefore, the holy sword also had a hidden blessing for Artoria. However, Wu Ming was puzzled that Artoria didn't die after the sword in the lake was returned. Logically speaking, after the sword in the lake was returned to the lake sprite, King Arthur should have fallen into a deep sleep. However, Artoria became the king of the undead who couldn't die. However, there was another possibility. If the holy sword wasn't returned to the lake sprite, then Artoria probably couldn't die. The story of Bedivere returning the holy sword 3 times was the best explanation. Artoria was seriously injured. Even with the blood of the red dragon, she couldn't hold on until Bedivere returned the holy sword 3 times before she died. It was probably a blessing that was like a curse. As long as the sword was not returned, Artoria would not die. Guinevere, do you know who didn't respond to Lily's summon? Wuming became a little bit more serious. Guinevere thought carefully and looked at Wuming. I remember that only you, Sir Villo, Galahad, the son of Lancelot, and Bedivere who witnessed the end of King Arthur didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. It's not strange that you didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon, but it's strange that Galahad and Bedivere didn't respond. Guinevere knew that Wuming's identity was special. However, it was strange that Galahad, who obtained the Holy Grail because of the purity of his soul, and Bedivere, who witnessed the end of King Arthur and was extremely loyal to King Arthur, didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. While Guinevere was thinking, Wuming was also thinking. As expected, Wuming thought. If Bedivere didn't return the holy sword, then Artoria probably couldn't die. King Arthur, who couldn't die, picked up the holy spear and was summoned to this era. Due to some influence, he became the Lion King. If Bedivere didn't return the holy sword, then where did Bedivere go? His loyalty to Artoria was no less than anyone else's, and his soul was no less than Galahad who obtained the Holy Grail. However, Bedivere didn't respond to Her Majesty's summon. What the hell is going on? Wuming couldn't help but frown. Guinevere came back to his senses and saw Wuming frowning. He couldn't help but panic. Guinevere thought that Wuming was unhappy because he mentioned Lancelot, so Guinevere hurriedly explained to Wuming. That. The legends about me and Lancelot in the future are not true. Nothing happened between me and Lancelot. However, a finger was placed on Guinevere's lips, stopping him from continuing. I'm not frowning because of Lancelot. I'm thinking of something else. Guinevere, you don't have to explain. No matter what, I believe you, Wuming said as he put his finger down. Wuming looked at Guinevere with firm eyes full of trust, which made Guinevere feel very touched. Master Villo. Guinevere covered his mouth with his hands. There were tears in his eyes, and he looked very touched. Good boy, don't cry. As if coaxing his girlfriend, Wuming gently stroked Guinevere's little head, and Guinevere rubbed his head. After that, Wuming and Guinevere chatted. By the way, how did you know it was me who came in? Wuming asked. After all, when Wuming opened the door, Guinevere immediately rushed over. That's because I have a telepathic connection with Master Villo, Guinevere replied playfully. Then, Guinevere was hit by Wuming. Actually, I used magic to find out. Guinevere covered his little head that was hit by Wuming and answered pitifully. Then, Guinevere took out a glowing compass-like gadget. Wuming took it and looked at it carefully. Wuming noticed that after he took the compass-like gadget, the gadget began to glow. Moreover, the compass-like gadget instantly pointed at him. So, this is a device you made to find me. Guinevere nodded honestly. After all, she was also a magician. If there was a person's hair or something like that, Guinevere could still perform a magic trick to find that person. And Wuming was Guinevere's knight, so it was easy for Guinevere to get Wuming's hair. Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then, Wuming returned the gadget to Guinevere, who put it away like it was a treasure. Then, Guinevere and Wuming chatted. During the conversation, Wuming learned that this was actually Artoria's bedroom. After all, Guinevere gave the order to Gawain using Artoria's identity, so he had to bring it to Artoria's bedroom. However, the reason why Artoria wasn't here was because she happened to wake up today. So, where did Artoria go after waking up? Wuming couldn't help but be curious. At this moment, the door of the room suddenly opened. Chapter 678. A holy light that seemed to pierce through the sky penetrated the wall of the Lion King's bedroom, and it lasted for a long time. After a while, the beam of holy light was retracted, and a large hole appeared on the wall of the Lion King's bedroom. Egwene and Tristan, who were guarding the holy city, were also attracted by the holy light. "My king, are you all right?" Egwene stood respectfully outside the bedroom and greeted the Lion King who was in the bedroom. Tristan stood behind Egwene and respectfully stood without saying a word. Even though they knew something was wrong in the bedroom, without the Lion King's order, they could not and did not dare to barge in. "I'm fine. The Villo has just returned. I was a little excited and had a little competition with the Villo. You can leave now." Artoria's mature and convincing voice came from the bedroom. "I see. The Villo has returned. Since the Villo is here, we will leave now." When Egwene said this, his voice was a little reluctant, but because it was the king's order, Egwene obeyed. "How sad. I will leave now." Tristan, who did not say a word, said this at the end. After that, Egwene and Tristan left. In the room, Artoria was sitting on a throne with her legs crossed. Guinevere was sitting on the edge of the bed without saying a word. Wuming, he was now leaning on the wall with a large hole in it. "Lily, are you really going to kill me?" After using his spirit sense to detect that Egwene and Tristan had left, Wuming immediately spoke. "If you can die from that attack, it only proves that you are too weak." Artoria said seriously without any intention of apologizing. On the other hand, Guinevere, who was watching from the side, pouted. "It's all because the Villo is not romantic." Wuming was speechless. "Well, it is indeed my fault. Putting aside the fact that two women were fighting for your affection, if you suddenly got angry and said, 'It's okay, you can continue,' when they were frightened, anyone would be angry." Even Guinevere, who had always been obedient to Wuming, was slightly dissatisfied this time, let alone Artoria. Although it seemed that Artoria was going to abandon her worldly values and be with Wuming, she was still the Lion King. She was the one who gave the order to the Knights of the Round Table to kill each other. She was the one who led the knights who had completely turned into the Lion King, defeated the arrogant Lionheart, built the new holy city, and carried out the cruel and inhumane saint selection. Thinking of this, Wuming's expression became serious. "I apologize for my rudeness. Now, let's get down to business, Lily." After all, Wuming was here to find Artoria. Artoria nodded nonchalantly. Whether it was as her lover or as her subject, Wuming had the right to negotiate with her. However, Guinevere, who heard Wuming's serious tone, panicked a little. Through the conversation with Wuming, she knew that Wuming was not here to join the Lion King. He was here to cause trouble. Whether it was Artoria or Wuming, both of them were extremely important to Guinevere. One was husband and wife on the surface, but in private, they were best friends. The other was her knight and her lover, so Guinevere did not want to have a conflict between the two. However, whether it was Artoria, Wuming, or Guinevere, she knew that since things had developed to this point, the two of them could not solve the problem without talking. Do you want me to prepare some refreshments?" Guinevere asked hesitantly. Artoria didn't say anything, nor did she move. Wuming nodded. "Go, and remember to prepare more." However, after hearing Wuming's reminder, Guinevere could not help but smile. Why should he prepare more? It was because there was not enough to eat. As for why there was not enough to eat, Guinevere glanced at Artoria, who was unperturbed, and smiled happily. After all, Wuming's words gave Guinevere another meaning, which was that they could not fight. Preparing more refreshments was for them to eat slowly. If they fought, they would not be able to eat anymore. Guinevere nodded with a smile, got up gracefully, and left the room. Seeing Guinevere leave in a good mood, Wuming let out a sigh of relief. He purposely gave Guinevere the feeling that they could not fight. After all, this could not only take care of Guinevere's feelings, but also find a reason to make Guinevere leave. After all, Wuming did not have to fight because he did not want to. Wuming took a deep look at Artoria. He looked at her eyes that were glowing for some unknown reason. Although Artoria was still the familiar one, Wuming knew that the Artoria in front of him was a familiar stranger. She was not the familiar King Arthur, but the unfamiliar Lion King. Perhaps in the past, King Arthur would choose to listen to Wuming, but facing this Lion King, Wuming felt that she would not listen to him. "Lily, although you have changed a lot, after what happened just now, I feel that you are still the same Lily." Artoria did not move. Only her glowing eyes flickered. She then looked at Wuming. "You too. Although I don't know how many years you have lived, you have not changed at all. You are still the one who pledged to marry me." However, Artoria's words made Wuming feel a little helpless. "Don't make it sound so ambiguous. Wuming and Artoria just made a promise that one would be the king for life, and the other would be the king's knight for life." Wuming suppressed the ridicule in his heart and pointed out the window. "Then, can you tell me why you want to carry out the holy purification? And what is with those huge craters outside the holy city?" Looking at Wuming's serious face and hearing his questioning tone, Artoria's expression did not change at all. She was still so calm, as if there was no emotion. "I think you should have seen that those craters were caused by my holy lance. Because those are the enemies of the holy city, they need to be annihilated." Artoria did not stop and continued. "The reason why I carried out the holy purification is because it is the best way to save mankind at the moment." Chapter 679. Artoria pointed at the part of the wall behind Wuming that was missing because of the Holy Lance's attack. Because they were on top of the Holy City's tower, Wuming and Artoria could see the edge of the world from where they were standing. "You should have noticed it as well, right? The edge of this world is constantly shrinking. In the end, the entire world will collapse. The best solution right now is to store humans with pure hearts into my holy spear. Only then can we ensure the existence and continuation of humanity. Then, why don't you cooperate with Chaldea? They have the ability to save this era. If it were you, you wouldn't hesitate to cooperate with them, right?" Wuming asked in confusion. However, Artoria shook her head. "They came too late. I can't leave the fate of the human race in their hands. If I did nothing but wait for their arrival, and if they deliberately got entangled in the first few months, this era would collapse, and the human race would be completely hopeless. Therefore, I made my choice. Moreover, the one who holds the Holy Grail is the king of the desert in the west. From the moment I arrived in this world, I knew that he had the temple as a defense. I couldn't take him down before this era collapsed. Therefore, I chose to have a truce with him and take another path to save the human race, which is to carry out the Holy Ascension." "But you abandoned the other people of this era," Wuming retorted instantly, and his tone was a little angry. "And the humans you collected will become specimens. That can't be called the continuation of the human race at all." Wuming clenched his fist and slammed it on the wall behind him. A part of the wall that was already broken and disappeared was damaged again. Another part of the wall broke and fell down the tower. After that, Wuming walked in front of Artoria and looked at the goddess-like beauty. "You have been affected by the Holy Lance for a long time. You are no longer a human, and you are no longer a specter. You have become a god that I don't like. You have been assimilated by the Holy Lance, Lungominiad. Lungaminiad, the goddess. Artoria's eyes flickered slightly. Although it disappeared quickly, Wuming still caught it. When Wuming saw Artoria, he noticed that his half-godslayer's soul reacted to her. This meant that Artoria had become a god. The only way Wuming could imagine Artoria becoming a god was to be assimilated by Lungaminiad. After all, it was an anchor that connected the two sides of the world. It would be fine if someone like Wuming had it, but if it was just a king with the red dragon bloodline, he would inevitably be assimilated. Wuming even felt some regret. He regretted that he did not add his blood into Artoria when Merlin, King User, and the others created her. Putting aside the fact that King Arthur had Artoria's bloodline, at the very least, Artoria wouldn't be assimilated by the Holy Spear to such an extent. If it were you in the past, you would have tried to find a way to get the best of both worlds. Although I don't like your personality in the past, I don't like the current you even more. I don't think I've done anything wrong. It's all for the sake of mankind. Artoria looked into Wuming's eyes without hesitation. Wuming also looked at Artoria's serious eyes. Her eyes were both familiar and strange, and they made him feel sad. Artoria was always considerate of the people. She was born for the sake of the people. She became a king for the sake of the people. She kept fighting and killing for the sake of the people. However, because of her selfless sacrifice, the people and even some of the knights of the Round Table were afraid of her. Although it was Tristan who said that kings do not understand people's hearts, who could guarantee that the people did not have the same thought? Maybe they already had such thoughts in their hearts, but they did not dare to say it out loud. In the end, she was betrayed by the people she protected. Until her death, she still turned into a heroic spirit to protect her people who belonged to the human race. And the Lion King in front of them was one of the many possibilities for Artoria. Because of special reasons, Artoria did not die. Instead, she picked up the Holy Lance. After receiving the Holy Lance, not only did her body develop quite well, but her heart also developed quite well. She was infinitely close to becoming a god. However, her main purpose was still to protect the human race. That was why she used such an extreme method. In Wuming's opinion, the reason why some of the Knights of the Round Table chose to stand against Artoria after she announced her decision was that they did not want their beloved king to continue making mistakes like this. The most obvious example was Kai. Kai was Artoria's sworn brother. Although he did not have much contact with Artoria because of Wuming, he and Artoria were sworn siblings after all. Because he knew Artoria well, Kai did not hesitate to stand against her. If Kai was still here, he would definitely say something like this. Since Lord Villo is not here, let me, your sworn brother, correct the king's mistake. However, Kai had already left. He was defeated by the Knights of the Round Table who stood on Artoria's side. Most of the Knights of the Round Table who chose to stand on Artoria's side wanted to show their loyalty to the king. Lancelot, Tristan, Agravain, and Gawain were all loyal to the king. Because he was the cause of the destruction of half of Camelot, Lancelot felt guilty toward Artoria. Tristan also felt guilty because he was the first to speak. Argervin had always been foolishly loyal to Artoria. Gawain also felt guilty, because the destruction of Camelot could be considered to have been caused by his obsession. Unlike the Knights of the Round Table who stood on the opposite side of Artoria, these Knights of the Round Table did not care about the king's right or wrong. They just wanted to show their loyalty as the king's knights. The Knights of the Round Table who stood on the opposite side of the king were also loyal to the king. However, they did not want to be blindly loyal. They did not want to see the king go astray, so they stood on the opposite side of the king. So, are you going to stop me, just like Kai and the others? Artoria sat and looked up at Wuming who was standing in front of her. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Gotcha. The sound of the door opening could be heard. Guinevere walked in with a small cart used for serving food. I've prepared the snacks. However, when he saw the tense atmosphere between Artoria and Wuming, Guinevere was scared speechless. Are you guys okay? Guinevere forced a smile. Chapter 680. Don't worry, nothing will happen to me and Lily. Wuming smiled at Guinevere with a look that said, nothing will happen to us. Wuming walked to Guinevere and took the cart from Guinevere's hand. He then looked at Artoria. Let's have some snacks first. Ever since you became the queen, we barely had time to eat snacks together. Artoria stared at the snacks on the cart and nodded. No matter how things changed, Artoria's attitude towards food would not change. Seeing Artoria like this, Wuming couldn't help but feel relieved. Wuming pushed the cart over, picked up a snack, and put it in front of Artoria. Artoria paused and then looked at Wuming. Take it as an apology for not responding to your call in time, Lily, Wuming said with a gentle smile. Artoria didn't say anything, and her expression didn't change. After all, she was the queen. How could she accept food from others? Guinevere thought. But just when Guinevere thought Artoria refused, Artoria opened her mouth and ate the snack that Wuming gave her. I miss it, Artoria said softly. Guinevere was jealous. Mr. Villo, I want some too, Guinevere clung to Wuming and pouted. Yes, just like that, Wuming began the game of snacks, which was actually food. After the snacks were eaten, the negotiation between Wuming and Artoria also ended. I won't be your enemy, Lily. After all, Artoria gave the Knights of the Round Table 3 choices. One was to kill her, the second was to join her, and the third was to leave her. I will leave, but I will come back again. After Wuming said those words like a villain, he left the holy city without any hesitation. Although she knew that Wuming might become her enemy in the future, Artoria didn't stop Wuming. Artoria just gave an order to all the knights of the holy city, and then fell asleep again. The British silver dragon Villo, Saranth, has become a rebel knight. If you meet him in the future, you can fight him. Gawain and Agrawin, who stayed in the holy city, were shocked, but they were completely loyal to Artoria and immediately accepted the order. Guinevere sat by the window, looked at the direction where Wuming left, and sighed. Mr. Villo, after he left the holy city, he had been going west. Wuming didn't want to be an enemy of Artoria, but he could be an enemy of the servant in the desert in the west. He could take the Holy Grail from the servant, and then find Gadotzi and the others, and restore the humanity before Artoria's plan could be carried out. After all, if Artoria's plan was successful, then even if the singularity didn't completely collapse, it would collapse because of Artoria's plan. In short, the Holy Lance was the rocket, the pure-hearted people were the transportation materials, and the entire singularity, including other humans, was the fuel to push the rocket. The fuel would be burned out, and the rocket would be successfully launched at the cost of the fuel. And even if Wuming defeated Artoria, the central control center, if the Holy Grail was not recovered, the singularity's collapse would continue. Therefore, Wuming decided to kill the Desert King first, recover the Holy Grail, find Gadotzi, and restore the humanity. Unknowingly, Wuming had already walked to the wilderness before. According to Wuming's guess, this was probably the battlefield of the war that took place in this singularity. Whether it was the Crusaders and the former holy city of Jerusalem, the Lion King and the Lionheart King, or even the current Lion King and the Desert King, the main battlefield was likely to be here. Therefore, the land here was completely dead, the trees withered, and lost their vitality. Gradually, Wuming walked to the place where he first appeared. There was a sunken circle on the ground here. This was a small trick Wuming used to trap the refugees. After Wuming released the refugees, he didn't repair this place. After all, after the singularity was restored, this place would also be restored. Now it seems that this place can be used as a marker. After all, this place was quite obvious, although Wu-Ming wouldn't get lost. After briefly reminiscing about this place, Wu-Ming left. After all, Wu-Ming still didn't know the enemy's information. No, it couldn't be said that he didn't know, it should be said that he didn't know at all. Wu-Ming only knew that the other party was a pharaoh, that was all. If I knew earlier, I would have asked Lily and Veer about the Sun King. However, since things had come to this, Wu-Ming couldn't go back. After all, I'm not weak. Wu-Ming encouraged himself. Magic power condensed in his eyes. Wu-Ming looked ahead, and not far away, there was a place where sand was faintly visible. That should be the edge of the desert. Although that was the case, Wu-Ming only saw sparse sand in the place, and many places were still lifeless wastelands. Let's prepare a little. The magic power in his eyes dissipated, and Wu-Ming said lightly. After the magic power in his eyes dissipated, more magic power emerged from Wu-Ming's body. Blue magic power condensed from Wu-Ming's body, like a blue flame burning Wu-Ming's body. In an instant, the blue flame dissipated, and what was revealed was an armor formed by magic power. Then there was a cracking sound, and some fragments of armor appeared on Wu-Ming's back. The fragments surrounded Wu-Ming's head and turned into a helmet that looked like a dragon's head. Wu-Ming waved his hand, and a red cape appeared from his shoulders, fluttering with the wind. Then, Wu-Ming's body flew up. After all, walking was a bit slow, so Wu-Ming chose to use telekinesis to fly. Telekinesis was not magic, it was the evolution of powerful mental power, so it was not limited to factors such as spirit base and magic power. Just like that, Wu-Ming began to fly toward the desert in the west. However, it wasn't long before Wu-Ming discovered that many figures had appeared below him. Wu-Ming took a closer look, and at the end of the black mass of figures, there was a knight in armor. Wu-Ming took a closer look, and it was actually Tristan. Tristan. Why is he here? Wu-Ming was puzzled. But after seeing other things, Wu-Ming was no longer puzzled. He was chasing some refugees, and those refugees were the ones Wu-Ming saved from Gawain at the city gate. Chapter 681. Back then, after Wu-Ming won the bet with Gawain, Gawain let the refugees go. But Gawain also said that if Agawin knew about it, he would definitely send people to hunt them down. And even if Gawain didn't meet Agawin after sending Wu-Ming to Artoria's bedroom, nor did he take the initiative to report to Agawin about Wu-Ming, it was normal for Agawin to know about Wu-Ming's arrival. After all, Agawin and Tristan were attracted by Artoria's Holy Lance attack, and at that time, Artoria also said that Wu-Ming was back. Since Wu-Ming entered the Holy City, Gawain must have known about it. In addition, there was a holy selection today, so as the manager, Agawin couldn't not ask Gawain about it. And with this question, the news of the refugees being released naturally reached Agawin. And as Gawain said, Agawin directly sent Tristan to hunt down those refugees, which explained why Tristan appeared here. At this moment, those refugees were moving quickly towards the north. Looking at their route, they seemed to be heading towards the northern mountains. However, Wu-Ming was curious about one thing. What did these refugees experience and what decision did they make to come here? Most importantly, their speed was a little too fast. There must be a reason. Wu-Ming thought so, looked at the dense crowd of refugees, and felt the fluctuation of magic power. As a result, he really found the reason. It was a man or a woman wearing a tattered black cloth and a white skull mask on his face. It was unclear whether he was male or female. Wu-Ming could clearly feel that it was a servant. Wu-Ming looked at the person wearing the bone mask and vaguely had some guesses. With this appearance, I'm afraid there's only one answer. The location was the Middle East, wearing a skull mask and tattered black clothes like an assassin. It seemed that the other party was likely to be one of the elders of the mountain, Hassan Sabah. However, Wuming didn't have the time to think too much because Tristan had already caught up with the refugees. At this moment, drunk Hassan glared at Tristan, who had arrived in front of the refugees he led. "Damn it! Are you Knights of the Round Table always so aggressive?" Smoke-drunk Hassan was quite angry. Originally, she only came here to gather information, but she accidentally found some of her compatriots, refugees. After asking around, she found out that they had escaped from the holy city. According to their compatriots, after the saint uplifting ceremony, when they were about to be killed because they were not chosen, a knight appeared and saved them by betting with them, allowing them to escape the fate of being killed. Drunk Smoke Hassan doubted if what the refugees said was true. After all, he had seen many Knights of the Round Table. Every one of them said that they were loyal to the king or something. How could they save the refugees? However, this was indeed the case. However, drunk Hassan had no time to think about the truth of the matter now. What she needed to do was to bring these compatriots to the village in the northern mountains. As a mountain person who had hostile conflicts with the Sun King in the west and the Lion King in the east, drunk Hassan clearly realized that these compatriots were not safe after leaving the holy city. As an assassin's follower, drunk Hassan had information about the saint uplifting ceremony. Those who were chosen would enter the holy city and never come out again, and those who were not chosen would be killed by those sanctimonious knights. Therefore, knowing this information, she was not surprised by the information provided by these compatriots, refugees. However, drunk Hassan also knew that these compatriots, did not know that the Lion King would hunt down those who escaped from the saint uplifting ceremony. Therefore, even if the unknown knight saved these compatriots, refugees, there would be pursuers behind them. Therefore, her task was to lead these compatriots, refugees, away from here as soon as possible. Drunk Hassan did the same, and in order to make the route of her compatriots safer, she even used a noble phantasm with group movement speed increase and group stealth effect. The reason why drunk Hassan appeared here with her compatriots, refugees, was because drunk Hassan wanted to create an illusion for the pursuers. Therefore, she led these refugees to the south of the wilderness and prepared to head to the mountains in the north from here instead of going directly to the north from the holy city. Unfortunately, drunk Hassan underestimated the speed and number of pursuers. She did not expect that there was only one pursuer, and it was the ruthless magic-bound knight Tristan. After all, she also had contact with the Knights of the Round Table as one of Hassan's companions. Each of the Knights of the Round Table was an extraordinary powerhouse. However, if she had to choose a knight that drunk Hassan feared the most, then she would definitely choose Tristan. For some reason, the Knight of the Round Table Tristan was not like the information she found from books. The Tristan she came into contact with was neither gentle nor sensual. Instead, he was quite ruthless. In addition, he was summoned as an archer this time. Tristan, who held a magic bow in his hand, often cut the enemy into pieces. Moreover, because of the magic bow, Tristan's speed was not weak. In addition, he was not a stupid guy. Therefore, he easily found the group of refugees led by drunk Hassan. And because Tristan was alone, this made drunk Hassan's situation particularly unfavorable. Generally speaking, whether it was a retreat or a pursuit, not to mention the speed, a person who did these two things was always quite secretive. Just like drunk Hassan, if she retreated alone, then not to mention Tristan, even the Lion King himself might not be able to catch up. However, the situation this time was reversed. As an assassin who walked in the shadows, she had to lead many people to retreat in the light, and the number of pursuers became one person. Unfortunately, Tristan was quite qualified as a pursuer. Because drunk Hassan led a large group, she only discovered Tristan when he was about to approach the group of compatriots, refugees, that she led. After that, drunk Hassan fully activated his noble artifact and skills, hoping to get rid of Tristan. However, things went against her wishes. Not only did she not get rid of Tristan, but Tristan got closer to her. In the end, Tristan caught up with her and her compatriots, refugees. It's really sad. I'm not aggressive. I'm just following the rules. Tristan's voice was quite gentle, but what he did was the opposite of his voice. Whoosh, whoosh, two of the refugees led by drunk Hassan were instantly split into two halves. They didn't even have time to wail and died directly. This terrifying scene made the refugees panic, but drunk Hassan couldn't comfort them at this moment, because, if she was careless, then she would be the same as the two corpses that had turned into four halves. Chapter 682. How sad. Tristan closed his eyes and said this sentence coldly, contrary to his current expression. However, even if Tristan's eyes were closed, drunk Hassan did not think that the other party could not see it. Your purpose is for me, right? In that case, I'll use my life in exchange for the survival of my compatriots. I hope you can retreat, drunk Hassan said. After all, chasing a group of refugees all the way to the desert. If there was no temptation, how could anyone go to this extent? Indeed, the reason why I'm chasing them like this is also for you, one of Hassan, Tristan admitted generously. However, the mission given to me by the higher-ups is to hunt down the refugees. Finding Hassan is just an unexpected surprise. In short, Tristan meant that hunting down the refugees was the main mission, and killing Hassan was just a side mission. In that case, I'll use my head as the price to make you unable to move your legs and right arm for the rest of the day. Drunk Hassan said as he picked up the dagger in his hand and slashed at his own neck. Although it was a dagger, as long as there was a special technique, it was possible to cut off a head. With her identity as Hassan, she could also throw her head to Tristan within a few seconds after the head was cut off. Although Tristan's character was not like the Knights of the Round Table of King Arthur in the books, drunk Hassan knew that even so, he was still a knight of the Lion King. She could definitely make Tristan, as a knight, abide by the agreement she made by using such a semi-coercive method. He hoped that after his death, these compatriots could successfully reach the mountains in the north. As long as they entered the mountains, the other Hassan hiding in them would definitely find them. That way, they would be safe. Just like how time slows down before death, smoky drunk Hassan thought carefully. However, drunk Hassan found that the dagger he was slashing at himself could not be cut down. It was as if there was an invisible wall between his neck and the dagger, and this wall blocked the dagger from cutting his neck. At this moment, a voice came from beside him. If your death only requires Tristan's legs and right arm to remain motionless, then your sacrifice is meaningless. Drunk Hassan subconsciously turned his head. A silver knight, whose face could not be seen at all, was standing beside him, fully armed to the head and completely unable to see his face. The silver knight was Wuming, who had been watching from the sky. Looking at the patterns on Wuming's armor, drunk Hassan's heart trembled. Then, he quickly distanced himself from Wuming. That was because it was the coat of arms of the Knights of the Round Table. Although something prevented Smoky Drunk Hassan from committing suicide just now, Smoky Drunk Hassan found that he wasn't being controlled by others. He could still move freely. Reinforcements from the Holy City. Drunk Smoke Hassan looked at Wuming warily. However, amidst her vigilance, she also had doubts. Because if there was no one else around, then the one who used an unknown method to stop him from committing suicide would be this unknown knight in front of him. He was probably the one who said those words just now. Of course, drunk Hassan didn't think that this knight was here to help him. After all, he probably didn't want him to commit suicide to get information from him. Moreover, drunk Smoke Hassan had some doubts about the knight's words. What do you mean by that? Drunk Hassan asked cautiously. The sentence that drunk Smoke Hassan asked was the sentence, "Sacrifice is meaningless." At this time, Tristan answered for drunk Smokehossen. Sir Villo is right. I don't need to draw my bow at all. I can kill with just a flick of my finger. As if to verify his words, Tristan's right hand that was holding a magic bow that resembled both a bow and a zither lightly touched the strings of the zither. In an instant, invisible vacuum blades slashed towards the group of refugees along with zing-zing sounds. Not good. Drunk Smokehossen was shocked. Although he couldn't see Tristan's attack, drunk Smokehossen knew that it was after the whoosh sound that her two compatriots became corpses. However, drunk Smokehossen could only watch because he had no way to defend against such an attack. Moreover, even if he could defend against such an attack, he couldn't see Driss' attack. As a last resort, drunk Smokehossen could only pray. Just like the first Hassan, although Driss' attack was launched, no one died. In other words, there was an invisible defense that blocked Driss' attack. Drunk Smokehossen thought in his heart and looked at Wuming. Don't worry, unknown Hassan, I'm here to save you. Wuming said to drunk Smokehossen without moving. At this time, several people suddenly became excited. Sir Drunk Smoke, this Sir Knight is the one who saved us at the gate of the holy city. A bold refugee shouted. Yes, Sir Drunk Smoke, I remember this Sir Knight's armor. Me too, I recognize this Sir's voice. He is the Sir Knight who saved us before. Several refugees who remembered Wuming's voice and armor trembled and stood up. Wuming looked at these people with some surprise. Although they were evil people who were not chosen by the holy light, they stood up for their benefactor. This was enough for them as ordinary people. Wuming's mouth hidden under the helmet curved up. Sure enough, it didn't mean that people who were not chosen by the holy light were evil people. They could stand up for Wuming, and they didn't disappoint Wuming who saved them before and now. Drunk Smokehossen, who heard the refugees' words, was a little surprised. She didn't expect that the knight who saved her compatriots was really a knight of the Round Table. She was still wondering if it was a wild servant, but she didn't expect it to be a knight of the Round Table. In this way, she didn't see the knight before. After all, the knight was likely to be summoned by the Lion King, and looking at the knight's appearance, he was likely to have betrayed the Lion King. What do you mean, Sir Villo? Tristan closed his eyes and looked in the direction of Wuming. Although he destroyed his eyes because he killed his compatriots before, it didn't mean that he was blind. After all, he used to like to close his eyes, and he could still move normally. Whether it was the sensitivity of his ears or the magical enhancement of his eyes, the self-destruction of his eyes had no effect on Tristan. However, in the face of Tristan's question, Wuming just replied faintly. They are under my protection. Chapter 683. Sir Villo, your words are really sad. Are you going against my king? With a sad sigh, Tristan shook his head helplessly. Although Tristan had just left the holy city when Artoria issued the order of Wuming is the enemy, it did not mean that Tristan was a fool. The refugees that Agol asked him to hunt down were released by Wuming. In addition, Wuming came all the way here to save these refugees, and Wuming's attitude was problematic. All these factors told Tristan that Wuming and his king were likely to have a falling out. Think what you want. In short, I will protect them today. Wuming said, and the magic power in his body condensed. Like a lion proclaiming his territory, Wuming vented his magic power. Whether it was Tristan, Drunk Hassan, these refugees, or a few people from the fourth force hiding in the dark, all of them were shocked by Wuming's huge magic power. Immediately, Wuming turned to look at Drunk Hassan and nodded to him. Drunk Hassan was stunned, and then nodded as if responding to Wuming. Quick! Everyone, follow me! Drunk Hassan shouted at the refugees. Drunk Hassan was not a fool. Since someone was willing to help him resist Tristan, then he quickly escaped with the refugees. As for gratitude, he would talk about it when he had the chance to meet in the future. Although the refugees were trembling in fear, they were people who had experienced life and death. Therefore, when drunk Hassan shouted at them, the refugees immediately reacted. The refugees hurriedly moved in the direction designated by drunk Smoke Hassan. Before the refugees moved, almost everyone gave Wu Ming a brief look to express their gratitude for saving their lives for the second time. Because of the urgency of time, drunk Hassan only nodded to him. After a simple expression of gratitude, she quickly followed the refugees and headed north. Seeing the refugees and drunk Hassan gradually disappear, Wu Ming turned his head and looked at Tristan. "You're really giving me face." After all, if Tristan attacked the refugees with all his strength, Wu Ming really couldn't defend against all of Tristan's attacks. "You're too serious. Even if we become enemies, I still respect you," Tristan said as he saluted Wu Ming. Tristan was right. If Artoria did not become the king, but Wu Ming became the king, then the Knights of the Round Table's loyalty to Wu Ming would not be lower than the current Artoria. At least, if Wu Ming was the king, Tristan would not say that the king did not understand people's hearts. However, there was no if, Tristan and the other Knights of the Round Table, but this did not prevent them from respecting Wu Ming very much. However, Tristan, who had become the Lion King's knight, now only had one goal, which was to completely eradicate the Lion King's enemies. His hands that were stained with the blood of his compatriots could no longer draw his bow. The guilt of killing his compatriots had also pushed Tristan to the brink of collapse. King Arthur's Knight of the Round Table, Tristan, had disappeared and was replaced by the Lion Knight Tristan, who had received the blessing of the Lion King's Holy Grail. Therefore, even if he killed his compatriots, he would not feel sad. Even if he attacked the person he respected the most, he would not feel guilty. That is to say, after this, you are no longer the respected Villo, but an enemy. Wu Ming took down the meteor silver on the right side of his head and brandished it. "As expected of you, Tristan. This powerful strike is even stronger than when you were at your peak." However, facing Wu Ming's praise, Tristan shook his head calmly and said in a cold tone, "Even so, didn't you instantly take out your beloved sword and block this strike?" Yes, Tristan instantly launched an invisible vacuum attack, and Wu Ming instantly took out the meteor silver, allowing Tristan's strike to hit the meteor silver. The reason why Wu Ming used the meteor silver to block the attack instead of blocking it with his psychic power was because Wu Ming was ready to fight. "I really hope that Sir Villo can take the initiative to step aside. If you do that, after I deal with the refugees and that Hassan, I can still plead for you to the king." Tristan shook his head regretfully. Tristan's arrogant words made Wu Ming smile. "You know my personality. If you don't defeat me, don't even think about leaving today." After Wu Ming finished speaking, magic power burst out from his feet. In an instant, Wu Ming burst toward Tristan. Facing Wu Ming, who rushed over, Tristan picked up his magic bow expressionlessly. "That's really sad, Sir Villo." The battle was about to start. Not far away, the fourth force hidden here secretly hid in a place with a lot of stones. "Don't look, dear Da Vinci, hurry up and think about what we should do next." An orange-haired girl lowered her voice and looked at a big sister who looked almost exactly like Mona Lisa with a sad and helpless face. This orange-haired girl was the last master of humans who solved the 5 singularities and formed a fate with many heroic spirits. The normal master of the Human Survival Protection Organization, Finus Chaldea, Finus Tachika Gadotsi. And the big sister Mona Lisa beside Gadotsi was the third servant summoned by the former director of Chaldea, Leonardo da Vinci. In addition, beside the two, there was a little girl dressed in sexy clothes. Cough cough. Gadotsi's contracted servant, the sub-servant possessed by the Holy Grail Knight Galahad, Matthew Gillett. As early as when Tristan caught up with drunk Smoke Hassan, and Wu Ming stopped Tristan, the three of them had already arrived here. When Da Vinci said that, whether it's a bow or a full-body armor, we can't beat them, Gadazzi and Matthew were pulled away by Da Vinci to hide. The reason why Gadazzi suddenly asked was that Da Vinci's expression at the moment was a little strange. At this moment, as if watching a play, Da Vinci looked at the fierce confrontation between the Holy Sword Knight and the Magic Bow Knight not far ahead. "Well, what's the matter, Tachika? Isn't it good for us to benefit from the fight between two tigers?" Da Vinci didn't look back and continued to look forward happily. The good student Matthew raised his hand and asked Da Vinci puzzledly. But, Da Vinci, the Silver Knight seems to be a good person, shouldn't we help?" Gadazzi, who was standing at the side, also nodded vigorously. Because Da Vinci said that the two knights were not ordinary servants, the three of them hid far away just in case. Although the distance was a little too far, Gadazzi couldn't hear the conversation, but through her own eyes, Gadazzi could still see the current situation. The knight with the bow killed a few people, and the servant suspected to be one of Hassan wanted to commit suicide, but for some reason, he stopped when the Silver Knight appeared. After that, the servant suspected to be Hassan left with the refugees, leaving the Silver Knight to fight against the Magic Bow Knight. In this way, the Silver Knight was likely to be a good person. Facing the doubts of Matthew and Gadazzi, Da Vinci smiled and explained. "Let's not talk about how you two judged that the Silver Knight is a good person, moreover, we can't intervene in the battle between servants of their level." Chapter 684. Gadazzi and Matthew both exclaimed and then calmed down. It seemed that what Da Vinci said was right. "Then do we need to leave?" Gadazzi asked. After all, the refugees had already left, and they couldn't intervene in the battle between the two knights. It seemed that the only answer left was to leave. However, Da Vinci smiled and shook his head. This made Gadazzi and Matthew confused. Why was he so hesitant to advance and not to retreat? Why was he being so hesitant? At this time, Gadazzi's bracelet made a sound. "Well, I think Da Vinci meant for you to wait and see." "Ah. I forgot that there was a doctor," Matthew said awkwardly. Matthew's words are really hurtful. "Even if I couldn't contact you for a while, you wouldn't have forgotten about me." Roman's words were full of powerlessness. When Gadazzi and the other two came to this singularity, they appeared directly in the desert. Because of the enchantment, Gadazzi and the other two had lost contact with Chaldea for a while. It wasn't until they walked out of the desert that they contacted Roman. After that, after a brief understanding of Gadazzi's experience, Roman and Da Vinci suggested that they go to the Holy City to have a look. Previously, in order to contact Gadazzi, Roman had risked his life a little. Therefore, he rested for a while and didn't say anything. In addition, Roman's presence was indeed a little low, so Gadazzi and the other two, no, it should be Gadazzi and Matthew, ignored Roman for a while. "Oh, I'm sorry," Gadazzi smiled embarrassedly. "Forget it, after all, I'm used to it. Fortunately, the director is not here, or I would be scolded again. After all, it was the fault of the person operating the spirit particle transfer device that sent Gadazzi and the other two to an unknown enchantment." Speaking of Olga Marie, Matthew remembered something and asked. "Is Miss Teep still in the superintendent's room?" Then, Roman's voice was heard. "Yes, that's right. This time, the director has figured out a little bit of the third method." As the director's follower, Miss Teeps was naturally affected. "They haven't come out yet." As he spoke, Roman began to feel distressed. "If it weren't for the fact that Miss Teeps couldn't accompany you to the singularity this time, I wouldn't have let Da Vinci accompany you." Due to the third law of Olga Marie's body, Pamilio was unable to accompany Gadazzi and Matthew on the singularity exploration. Therefore, Leonardo da Vinci, who had volunteered to accompany Gadazzi and Matthew, had volunteered to accompany them. "After all, I am also a follower of Chaldea. I haven't been to the singularity even once. Leonardo da Vinci said with a heartless smile. I hope you can accompany me here. If you are here, I'm afraid there won't be an accident with the spirit particle transfer. Even if there is an accident, with your technology, you can break through the enchantment and contact Chica. Roman sighed. This was not a compliment. After many tribulations, the various equipment of Chaldea had been upgraded by the genius Da Vinci. If Da Vinci were to operate it, it would be much better than Roman. Well, you can contact us now. It's already very good. Da Vinci comforted Roman. Boom! Suddenly, an explosion sounded not far away from Godotzi and the other two. The explosion set off a gust of wind mixed with gravel and hit Godotzi. Senior, be careful. Matthew shouted and instantly materialized a shield in front of Godotzi. Clang, 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 the gravel was like a bullet, hitting Matthew's shield, making a messy collision sound. After a while, the wind calmed down, and the gravel no longer shot at Matthew's shield. Senior, are you okay? Matthew turned to look at Godotzi with concern. I'm fine. Thank you, Matthew. It's all thanks to you. Godotzi smiled and gratefully hugged Matthew. Senior, it's good that you're okay. Matthew's face was slightly red as he turned his head. At this time, Leonardo da Vinci spoke with a strange voice. Big sister, I was ignored just like that. I'm so sad, ugh. Godotzi and Matthew looked at Leonardo da Vinci helplessly. Speaking of which, dear Leonardo da Vinci, do you really mean that we should wait and see like what the doctor said? Godotzi asked in a hurry. The reason why she was so anxious was because, those 2 nights are almost here. Senior, dear Leonardo da Vinci. Matthew looked at Wu Ming and Tristan who were gradually approaching them and reminded in a panic. It was precisely because Wu Ming and Tristan were fighting that they got closer to this side, that the situation of gravel flying everywhere happened. And they couldn't beat the other party at the moment. If they were discovered, they would definitely be treated as thieves. Maybe there would be another misunderstanding and they would have to start fighting with the other party again. However, according to Leonardo da Vinci, they couldn't beat the other party at all, whether it was a one-on-one or a group fight. Don't worry, take a closer look at the fully armed knight over there. Leonardo da Vinci reminded them. Hearing that, Godotzi and Matthew looked at Wu Ming who was gradually suppressing Tristan. Suddenly, Godotzi and Matthew came to a realization. It's Assassin. It's Senior Sira. The two of them saw the armor worn by the knight who was suppressing Tristan. The armor was basically the same as the armor that Wu Ming entrusted to Godotzi when she left the 5th singularity. That's right, that's Sira's armor. Leonardo da Vinci had an expression of, you finally realized. Godotzi and Matthew could only scratch their heads helplessly. After all, Godotzi was just an ordinary person. Because of the distance, although Godotzi could still see Wu Ming, she couldn't see it clearly. Matthew was the same. As an immature subservient, she couldn't add magic to her eyes to improve her vision like Leonardo da Vinci, so she couldn't see it clearly. And now, they could see it clearly, and Godotzi and Matthew also understood why Leonardo da Vinci didn't let them go. Because the person in the armor was likely to be Wu Ming. Moreover, even if the other party wasn't Wu Ming, he must be someone who had a great relationship with Wu Ming. Therefore, choosing to contact the other party was the most advantageous option at the moment. What? That knight is Sira. That's too ridiculous, he's a warrior of Ulster, how could he come here? Roman felt that his brain had gone haywire. First, it was the Egyptian pharaoh, and then the Lionheart king that Roman proposed to contact was gone. Then, a Lionheart king appeared out of nowhere, and there was also a knight who seemed to be an acquaintance. No matter what, the other party is related to Assassin, so he must be a good person. Gadotzi decided that she would contact the other party. Then, Senior, should we help the enemy who seems to be Senior Sira? However, Leonardo da Vinci answered first. I don't think so. Because Wu Ming had already defeated Tristan. Chapter 685. A moment later, Wu Ming rushed towards Tristan with meteor silver in his hand. Facing Tristan, although Wu Ming was a little cautious, he didn't care too much about Tristan. Tristan's fame wasn't as big as Wu Ming and Wu Ming, but Wu Ming didn't think that Tristan was weak. On the contrary, Tristan was very strong, not weaker than Lancelot. Knights of the Round Table were considered the best among the servants, and all Knights of the Round Table had the adaptability of the saber, swordsman, class. It was reasonable to say that Tristan should also be a swordsman, but because Tristan's magic bow was more famous than his sword-wielding deeds, Tristan's archer, class adaptability was much higher than the saber, swordsman, class adaptability. And this time, Tristan was an archer, class. Even if it wasn't the best saber, swordsman, class, the archer, class itself was one of the 3 excellent knight classes. Therefore, Tristan wasn't afraid of Wu Ming, who was a saber, swordsman, class. His magic bow, not to mention the speed and angle of the vacuum arrow, the speed of his magic bow could catch the enemy off guard. No matter how good the person's martial arts were, they couldn't completely avoid his attack. However, as a member of the Round Table, Wu Ming naturally knew this. But Wu Ming was still not afraid of Tristan. And the reason why Wu Ming wasn't afraid of Tristan was also discovered by Tristan, and that was, he couldn't hurt Wu Ming at all. Ding ling ling ling, Tristan gently plucked the strings of the magic bow in his hand, and several invisible attacks appeared out of thin air and attacked Wu Ming. Zing zing zing, the vacuum blade made a sound in the air, and Tristan was sure that his attack had hit Wu Ming, but the opponent was completely fine. This again. Tristan frowned slightly, then suddenly rolled and dodged the sword chi released by Wu Ming using meteor silver. The sword chi of meteor silver slashed into the ground, and the originally barren land instantly had a deep gully that wasn't wide. Every time Tristan attacked Wu Ming, those invisible vacuum blades that slashed onto Wu Ming had no effect, as if a machete was cutting cotton. However, in Tristan's impression, as a Knight of the Round Table, he didn't have such a strange ability. Closing his eyes, Tristan relaxed his brows and looked at Wu Ming. It seems that you still have some tricks up your sleeve. However, Tristan's didn't pay his words, SSSSS. Was in SSSSSS, SSSS. S's. It couldn't be helped. No matter what kind of clothing or armor it was, it couldn't defend against the attack of vacuum unless it was some kind of special clothing or armor. However, this did not mean that Wu Ming was defenseless. The principle of the vacuum arrow was to use atmospheric pressure to attack. Wu Ming concentrated all of his mental power on the surface of his body, pushing out all of the air on the surface of his body. As a result, a layer of vacuum formed on the surface of Wu Ming's body. As for Wu Ming's mental power, after pushing out the air, it constantly caused friction between the surrounding air and the vacuum zone, causing a fault to form between the vacuum zone and the air. As long as something approached Wu Ming's surroundings, it would be cut off by the fault around Wu Ming's body. This caused Silent Cry to be surrounded by a layer of invisible vacuum defense. Using fire to attack fire, water to attack water, and air to attack air would cancel each other out. When Tristan's vacuum arrow came into contact with Wu Ming, the vacuum arrow and vacuum zone cancelled each other out. That was why it was said that the power of science was the greatest. For an ancient person like Tristan, it wasn't that Wu Ming mocked him, but he was indeed outdated. Of course, Wu Ming definitely wouldn't tell Tristan about his methods. That's why, can't you retreat yourself? Although Wu Ming said that, he had no intention of letting Tristan leave. The moment Wu Ming finished his words, he released magical power from his feet and attacked Tristan once again. Tristan shook his head calmly. Although his attacks were basically useless against Wu Ming and his vacuum traps were also likely to be ineffective, Tristan didn't think that Wu Ming could keep defending against his attacks. For example, noble artifacts and the like, the outcome isn't certain yet. The moment before Wu Ming attacked, Tristan used the power of the wind brought about by the magic bow to move his body swiftly and easily dodged Wu Ming's attack. Boom! Wu Ming's sword fiercely struck the ground where Tristan had been standing. Only a dong sound could be heard, and crushed stones flew everywhere. Then, I shall defeat you with my next attack. In an instant, Wu Ming raised the meteor silver. Tristan's blind eyes trembled slightly. He understood what Wu Ming was trying to do. Wu Ming was about to unleash his noble artifact. However, this was exactly what Tristan wanted because he was about to unleash his noble artifact. Stained with the blood of the legendary dragon and comparable to Excalibur? Tristan looked at the glowing holy sword in Wu Ming's hand. After all, he and Wu Ming were once comrades and he knew quite a lot about this holy sword. If it's the noble artifact, I can't defeat you. At this moment, Wu Ming's holy sword was shining brightly. Although Tristan said that he couldn't defeat him, he still picked up the magic bow. However, I have the blessings of my king, so the outcome is still uncertain. X silver. Fail not. Almost at the same time, Wu Ming and Tristan unleashed their noble artifacts at the same time. Tristan's hand continuously moved his magic bow at an extremely fast speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. In an instant, countless vacuum threads that were almost visible to the naked eye wrapped around Wu Ming at an extremely fast speed. Wu Ming stood in the same place, holding the holy sword that was getting more and more solid. But what made Tristan puzzled was that Wu Ming didn't move at all. Tristan couldn't help but frown. He clearly remembered that Wu Ming's noble artifact was the same as Artoria's light cannon. But now, Wu Ming actually hid the light of the holy sword. Tristan didn't understand what Wu Ming was doing, but it didn't hinder his noble artifact. Tristan controlled the magic bow with one hand and plucked the bowstring, or rather, the strings of the zither with the other. Although Wu Ming used an unknown method to defend against his attack, the change in quantity led to a qualitative change. The pond couldn't withstand the impact of the sea, the flame couldn't withstand the impact of the explosion, and the more powerful and chaotic vacuum would devour the weaker vacuum. Coupled with the Lion King's blessing, as long as these attacks hit, Tristan could guarantee that Wu Ming would be seriously injured even if he didn't retreat. However, just as Tristan's countless vacuum threads were about to approach Wu Ming suddenly entered a purplish-black ripple and disappeared. What? Chapter 686. Tristan controlled the threads to enter the dark purple ripple, trying to catch up to Wu Ming who was engulfed by the dark purple ripple. Then, Tristan was stabbed in the back. Slash! The sound of a sword piercing into flesh came from behind Tristan. What? PFFF, Tristan gasped in disbelief. Then, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He could clearly feel an attack from a noble artifact slashing his back. Even though he couldn't see his back, Tristan could still feel that the slash had slashed his back from his shoulder to his lower back. The invincible Tristan fell. Then, he turned his head around and looked behind him. Two dark purple ripples appeared behind Tristan, similar to the one where Wu Ming was. In one of the ripples, countless threads that belonged to Tristan's noble relic also came out. However, these threads entered the second dark purple ripple. As for where the threads that entered the second dark purple ripple went, Tristan had no idea. However, he now knew how Wu Ming got behind him and avoided his noble relic that went deep into the dark purple ripple. You should have heard some rumors, right? I'm not human. Tristan removed his noble relic and Wu Ming kept the three dark purple ripples. Tristan nodded helplessly. Yes, that's right. I've heard rumors that Sir Villo isn't human. Tristan began to use the term of address. And since Tristan said so, it meant that he was aware of Wu Ming's situation. Even so, you and His Majesty are still the most respected people among the Knights of the Round Table. Tristan's tone started to become gentle, as if the words of a dying man are kind. However, Wu Ming kicked Tristan unhappily. All right, you're talking like you're leaving. I've held back. I didn't hurt your spirit core. Although Tristan's back was slashed open by Wu Ming's noble artifact and he spat out a lot of blood, Tristan's spirit core was not injured at all. Servants were made of magical power. Whether it was blood, bones, or anything else, they were all made of magical power. As long as the most important spirit core was not destroyed, and there was enough magical power, then the servant would not leave. Generally speaking, when a servant was injured, they would replenish their mana from their master. Although Tristan was a servant summoned by the Lion King, his master was not the Lion King. He was a servant summoned by the Holy Grail without a master. Not only Tristan, but all the Knights of the Round Table, including Tristan, had no followers. The only reason they were under the Lion King was because they were King Arthur's knights. If they wanted to rebel, the Lion King would not have used a command charm to control them. This was also the reason why the Lion King allowed the knights to make a choice in the beginning. It was because the Lion King was not their master, so they had the right to choose for themselves. To become the king's sword in the Lion King's hand, or to become the imperial sword that stabbed the Lion King. Some people chose to become the Lion King's sword, and some people became the Death Admonishers. After that, the Lion King's sword slaughtered the Death Admonishers who held the Imperial sword. Therefore, as the Lion King's blade, Tristan wasn't the Lion King's follower. In addition, he didn't have the means to replenish his mana. Therefore, even if his spiritual core wasn't damaged, he could only leave the stage. Are you going to save me? Tristan asked in confusion. Wu Ming nodded as a matter of course. Since your spirit core is not injured, then as long as I provide you with mana, you can recover. However, Tristan's face was still full of confusion. Lord Varen, you've defeated me, so of course I'm yours to deal with, but please don't try to use me to deal with my king. If you do, I'll use my noble phantasm to kill myself in an instant after you heal me. The reason why Tristan chose to stand on the Lion King's side was because he was also the source of King Arthur's tragedy. Although his joke in his previous life was not the direct cause of King Arthur's death, King Arthur's death was also related to Tristan. Therefore, in this world, Tristan decided that no matter what, he would stand on the Lion King's side and completely become the Lion King's sword. Wu Ming, who had already guessed Tristan's thoughts, naturally would not let Tristan deal with the Lion King. You and I are also colleagues. I don't need to use my colleagues to deal with my king. I need your strength only to get you to help me seize the Holy Grail from the Sun King in the West. That's right. Although Wu Ming felt that he also had the ability to seize the Holy Grail from the Sun King, he had now discovered Gadotzi's trace. When Wu Ming and Tristan were fighting, Wu Ming discovered Gadotzi hiding in the distance because he was constantly moving. Why did Wu Ming come to this singularity? Wasn't it to help Gadotzi repair the singularity? And why did Wu Ming go to the desert in the west to find the Sun King? Wasn't it to obtain the Holy Grail? And the Holy Grail was to give it to Gadotzi so that they could repair the singularity. By the way, it could also stop Artoria's stubborn thoughts. When the singularity was repaired, even the gods would not be able to affect this place. After all, the era had eliminated the gods, and the goddess Lungaminiad would also be eliminated by the era of repair. Although Artoria's change also attracted a lot of Wu Ming's attention, Wu Ming was not a person who put the cart before the horse. His primary goal was still to help Gadotzi repair the singularity. And now that he had coincidentally found Gadotzi, Wu Ming would definitely act together with her. And looking at the direction where Gadotzi and the others were heading, it seemed that they had just walked out of the desert, so Wu Ming was not sure if they were going to return to the desert. Therefore, Wu Ming now needed a helper. I need you to go to the desert and wait for orders to prepare for me to seize the Sun King's Holy Grail. Wu Ming's words made Tristan ponder. As the loser, he was not killed by the other party, so he would not be a knight if he did not return the Holy Grail. And the other party did not do anything against the Lion King, so it seemed that it was acceptable. Wu Ming's next words were the last straw that broke the camel's back. Don't forget, the Sun King is also the Lion King's enemy. If you can help me eliminate the Sun King, then you will have done something that cannot be ignored. I accept your proposal, Lord Villo. Chapter 687. Tristan's surrender made Wu Ming nod in satisfaction. Then, Wu Ming and Tristan signed a contract. Wu Ming would provide Tristan with a large amount of mana to support his own recovery, and the price was that Tristan would temporarily become Wu Ming's subordinate. Wu Ming could order Tristan to do anything, but he couldn't order Tristan to do anything that was disadvantageous to the Lion King. This contract was two-way. Whether it was Wu Ming or Tristan, once they violated the contract, they would be counterattacked by the contract. Even so, this contract was still disadvantageous to Tristan. Firstly, the contract only required Wu Ming to provide mana, while Tristan had to listen to Wu Ming's orders. In comparison, the contract was quite disadvantageous to Tristan. Secondly, even if there was a counterattack from the contract, with Wu Ming's strength and means, Wu Ming wouldn't be in any situation at all. And if Tristan were to be counterattacked by the contract, the destruction of his spirit core would be the least of it. If it was more serious, Tristan's spirit foundation would collapse and he would be sent to the martyr's palace. However, this couldn't be helped. Who asked Wu Ming to be the strong? The strong wouldn't be bound by rules. Only the weak Tristan would be bound by the contract. This was the case in all aspects. After establishing a mana link with Tristan and providing Tristan with a large amount of mana to recover, Wu Ming looked at the pile of rocks not far away. In the battle just now, Wu Ming inadvertently found the hiding place of Gadotzi and the others. It should be there. Wu Ming was about to speak, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped Wu Ming. Then, Wu Ming snapped his fingers mischievously. A black-purple ripple appeared in the air above the pile of rocks. Then, a few large rocks that Wu Ming got from somewhere fell out of the black-purple teleportation gate. Ah! Senior! Watch out! Matthew's scream was the first to be heard. Those over there, please come out. Wu Ming deliberately lowered his voice and spoke to Gadotzi and the others in a rough voice. Although Tristan was puzzled as to why Wu Ming would change his voice to speak to the few hidden figures, he was still considered Wu Ming's subordinate after all. Therefore, he obediently shut his mouth and used the mana provided by Wu Ming to repair his body. Although Gadotzi's group had hidden themselves well in the beginning, due to Tristan constantly changing positions during his fight with Wu Ming, Tristan had long since discovered Gadotzi's group. But at that time, Tristan had to deal with Wu Ming first, so he didn't care about them. On Gadotzi's side, Matthew protected Gadotzi and Da Vinci with his shield. The surroundings were filled with scattered rocks that smashed onto Matthew's shield. Matthew put down his shield and looked at Gadotzi uneasily. What should we do, Senior? The other party seems to have discovered us. Because Wu Ming had added magic power to his words, Wu Ming's words sounded like he was whispering into the ears of Gadotzi and the other two. Because of this, whether it was Matthew or Gadotzi, they had already discovered that the other party's voice was not Wu Ming's. Dear Da Vinci, what should we do now? Gadotzi looked at Da Vinci in a panic. The reason why Gadotzi asked this was because Da Vinci did not show the slightest panic. Since the other party has discovered us, then let's go out. Da Vinci smiled lightly. After all, what else could they do other than go out? They didn't have any way to leave in an instant, so they could only go out and face the difficulties. Therefore, Gadotsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci walked out from the pile of rocks. The three of them approached Wuming and Tristan, then Gadotsi spoke first. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to hide, you don't have to explain. But he suddenly interrupted Gadotsi. Then, Wuming looked at Tristan, who had recovered and was able to stand up. Go to the desert and wait for orders. If possible, find a place to completely recover your spirit base. At this moment, Wuming's voice was still rough. Yes, Sir Villo. Tristan responded and walked towards the west. Since the deal had been made, Tristan would obediently abide by it. After all, this was a knight. Tristan looked at Gadotsi and the other two vaguely. He had more or less guessed the other party's identity. However, he did not have the chance to return to the holy city for the time being, so he could not report this news. However, Tristan did not think that a mere human master could affect the Lion King, so there was no need to be too concerned. Shaking his head, Tristan sped up and headed towards the desert area in the west. Gadotsi and Matthew watched the cold-looking knight leave. That knight with the strange bow should be Tristan. Suddenly, Da Vinci spoke. Wait. Da Vinci, what are you doing? Gadotsi looked at Da Vinci in panic. Matthew also moved his shield and prepared for battle. At this moment, Gadotsi and Matthew were extremely nervous. Past experience told Gadotsi and Matthew that if the conversation was not careful, it would definitely turn into a battle. And they did not seem to be able to defeat the knight in front of them. Listening to the other party's voice, the other party was not the person they knew. Even if the other party was related to the person they knew, they would have to talk slowly. However, Da Vinci spoke as if they were familiar with each other. How could this not make Gadotsi and Matthew worried? You two don't have to worry. Didn't you see that the other party didn't do anything? Da Vinci pointed at Wuming indifferently. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at Wuming and found that the other party did not do anything. Although there was indeed no movement, Gadotsi still quietly whispered in Da Vinci's ear. But, Da Vinci, it's better to be careful, Tachika, whispering to the people around you before you can distinguish whether the other party is an enemy or a friend. Such behavior will cause the other party to be dissatisfied. Sigh, this voice is. Gadotsi and Matthew both looked at Wuming blankly. Because this time, Wuming used his own voice. Assassin, Senior Sira. Gadotsi and Matthew both shouted in surprise. Wuming knowingly took off the helmet and clipped it to his waist. The knight who took off the helmet revealed the face that Gadotsi and Matthew were familiar with. Then, the face smiled and greeted Gadotsi and Matthew. Long time no see, Tachika, Matthew. Chapter 688. Gadotsi excitedly ran towards Wuming. Matthew, who was worried, wanted to follow her but was stopped by Da Vinci. Matthew looked at Da Vinci in confusion, but Da Vinci just smiled and shook his head at Matthew. Although Matthew still wanted to accompany Gadotsi, Gadotsi had already run to Wuming's side. Gadotsi suddenly pounced into Wuming's arms. The moment before Gadotsi pounced in, Wuming turned his helmet into magic power and threw the meteor silver. The golden ripples instantly engulfed it. Due to inertia, Wuming hugged Gadotsi and spun around a few times, successfully making Gadotsi laugh. Wah assassin, I missed you so much, ha ha ha. Wuming hugged Gadotsi and spun a few more times, then stopped and put Gadotsi on the ground. Wuming then stroked Gadotsi's little head as if he was looking at a little sister who needed love. I missed you too, Tachika. At this time, Gadotsi's watch suddenly emitted the sound of Roman's crazy and disbelief. Are you for real? Are you really Sira? This is unbelievable. If I didn't hear wrongly, the knight just called you a Villo. Could it be that you are King Arthur's first knight of the Round Table, Villo Sira Ed? But that's impossible. You are obviously Sira of Ulster, how could you become King Arthur's knight? The timeline doesn't match at all. Then, Roman seemed to have thought of something and his voice stopped abruptly. This made Gadotzi a little confused for a moment, thinking, what's wrong with the doctor? Why did he suddenly stop talking after a long speech? Wuming could not help but laugh at Roman's reaction. Ever since he knew about Gidea's identity, he was completely sure of Roman's identity and did not have the slightest doubt. And since Roman was that person, it was not strange that he knew about Wuming. But Roman could not show it, after all, he was just an ordinary human. Well, I forgot, you are a mysterious guy who has always been alive. If that's the case, then it's understandable that you left a record in history across time, ahahaha. Roman laughed. It had to be said that Roman's answer to himself was rather perfect. If he had been alive all this time, he would have been able to recover from his previous shock. It seems that this guy also enjoys being a human. Wuming could see that Roman's surprise for Wuming was indeed real. This meant that the other party did not rely on his previous strength, but relearned as a human. But, how much effort did you put in that ordinary people can't even catch up with you, Roman ace man? Wuming silently glanced at Gadotzi's watch that sent out Roman's communication sound. He seemed to see the young man with a helpless smile on his face. On the other side, Gadotzi just reacted from a sudden realization. Indeed, Wuming once generously admitted that he was still alive, so Wuming was likely to exist in human history a long time ago. Then, it was not strange that Wuming had multiple names and legends. Then, Gadotzi hugged Wuming again with a happy face. As expected of assassin, you're still very powerful. Wuming also smiled and hugged Gadotzi, but his eyes were thinking about something. It seems that I guessed correctly. Wuming thought in his heart. Wuming obviously did not have much contact with Gadotzi, at most only a few times, but just these few times raised Wuming's favorability in Gadotzi's heart to the extreme. On the other hand, Gadotzi's favorability in Wuming's heart also rose to a high level. But whether it was Gadotzi or Wuming, their favorability in their hearts was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but the kind of affection similar to family. To Gadotzi, Wuming who appeared several times to help her was like her brother, and to Wuming, Gadotzi was like a younger sister who encountered trouble and needed help many times. And the reason why there was such a feeling, Wuming guessed that the problem was with Gadotzi. However, even if he had guessed that the problem was with Gadotzi, Wuming did not find any abnormalities with Gadotzi. When Gadotzi threw herself into Wuming's arms, Wuming had already probed Gadotzi's body. But unfortunately, Gadotzi was completely an ordinary magician, and the kind that was at the rookie level. Except for some magic and the command spell in Gadotzi's hand, Wuming did not find any other mystery on Gadotzi's body. However, the most unusual thing was that there was no abnormality. Wuming raised his head and looked at the huge aperture that had always existed in the sky. Could it be that Gidea did something to Tachika? As soon as this thought appeared in Wuming's mind, it was immediately cut off by Wuming himself. There was no other reason. How could a contractor who had formed a fate with many heroic spirits be affected by Gidea? Don't underestimate the star crystallization of human faith, and don't underestimate the miraculous existence called heroic spirits. Senior, at this time, Matthew's voice came from behind Gadotzi, which was in front of Wuming. He saw Mashu holding her big shield and running towards him, while Da Vinci was following behind her at a leisurely pace. By the way, Da Vinci walked over. Matthew. Gadotzi broke away from Wuming's arms and waved at Matthew. After Matthew came to Gadotzi's side, he began to greet Wuming. Senior Sira, long time no see. However, Wuming smiled and shook his head. Call me Senior Villo, Matthew. Ha! Villo. Senior. Matthew was taken aback, and there was a slight change in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. Matthew looked at his hand, somewhat at a loss. Matthew could feel that Galahad, who was sleeping in his body, woke up for a moment, but then fell asleep. Maybe it's because Galahad, who was sleeping in your body, suddenly woke up because she saw the person she respected the most. Da Vinci, who was a step behind, explained slowly. Hey. Is Senior Sira really the Knight of the Round Table, Vilo Sira Ed? Matthew was shocked. The answer to Matthew was Wu Ming's familiar yet unfamiliar words. It's the real deal, Junior. Ahem. Here, I'll explain to everyone the issue of the address between Galahad and Vilo. No matter in any records, Galahad always called the Vilo Senior. Da Vinci kindly reminded. So, I have two seniors? Mashu said with excitement and uneasiness. However, Wu Ming shook his head. Matthew, as a subservient, Matthew does have two seniors, but you have to remember, as Matthew Gillett, you only have one senior, and that is Tachika Fujimaru. After all, only Galahad Sr. was Vilo Sira Ed, and Matthew Gillett Sr. was Gadotsi. Matthew and Gadotsi, who heard Wu Ming's words, were slightly touched. Just listen to Assassin, Matthew. Gadotsi said to Matthew with a smile. Facing Gadotsi and Wu Ming's smiling faces, Matthew nodded heavily. Yes. Senior. Chapter 689. Then, the genius Da Vinci, who didn't know how to break the atmosphere, personally broke the beautiful atmosphere. Alright, it's about time to talk about the Vilo. First of all, why did the Vilo pretend that he didn't recognize us? Da Vinci's words made Roman, who had been listening through Gadotsi's watch communicator, react. Yeah, I would have forgotten if Da Vinci didn't mention it. Why did you change your voice and pretend that you didn't recognize us? Although Roman was good at judging the situation, since Da Vinci had broken the atmosphere, he had nothing to worry about. That's right. I really thought that it was going to turn into a battle again. Phew, Gadotsi said doubtfully and finally let out a sigh of relief. Also, the falling rocks were done by Senior Vilo, right? Then why did Senior Vilo do that? Matthew also looked at Wu Ming doubtfully. Cough. Actually, I had my reasons for doing that. Wu Ming coughed without changing his expression and then became serious. Could it be that you wanted to hide your relationship with Chaldea in front of the knight? Roman assisted Wu Ming by forcefully explaining. Yes, that's right, that's it. Wu Ming immediately nodded and admitted without hesitation. Thinking about it carefully, Assassin did recognize us after the knight left and used her real voice to talk to us. Gadotsi also pondered and said. That's right. After all, if I directly used my own voice, Tachika would definitely recognize me. Moreover, the falling rocks were to prevent Tristan from suspecting you. That's why I did that. Wu Ming immediately took advantage of the situation and started to talk nonsense. After all, he couldn't possibly say that he was just being impulsive. Other than Da Vinci, who looked at Wu Ming with a smile, whether it was Matthew, Gadotsi, or Roman, who wasn't here and only understood the situation through the conversation, they all believed Wu Ming's words. Wu Ming hurriedly tried to muddle through, so he quickly diverted everyone's attention. Speaking of which, did you guys come out from the desert? From the position of Gadotsi and the other two, the probability of them coming out from the desert was very high. Gadotsi nodded as Wu Ming expected. Yeah, we were teleported directly into the desert by spirit particle transference. Gadotsi then told Wu Ming their experience. First, they entered the desert, causing the desert's enchantment to cut off the connection between Gadotsi and Chaldea. After that, Gadotsi and the others encountered the desert's divine beast, Sphinx. After defeating the Sphinx, Gadotsi and the other two naturally had to explore. After all, they couldn't contact Chaldea at that time, so they couldn't just sit back and wait for death. Fortunately, Da Vinci followed them. After searching through Da Vinci's equipment, the three found a water source and a city. On the way to the city, the three encountered a large group of Sphinx. However, these Sphinx didn't give Gadotsi and the others a headache because a group of men in black repelled the Sphinx group. After that, because the men in black looked a bit like bad guys and they really caught a sleeping woman, Gadotsi and the others came to her rescue. After that, the woman woke up and thought that they kidnapped her, so they fought with the other party again. Fortunately, Mr. Lucius came to help. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to go. Matthew gasped for breath. Lucius. Wuming made a puzzled sound. Yes, that's a knight. He happened to pass by when we were misunderstood by Miss Nittacles and saw the truth, so he came out to help us clarify the misunderstanding. Matthew nodded. So where is he now? Wuming wanted to meet this knight named Lucius. He always felt that he was also a key clue. Mr. Lucius left after he helped us. We don't know where he went either. Matthew's words disappointed Wuming a little. By the way, Nittacles is a pharaoh's follower. After we cleared up the misunderstanding, she brought us to the shrine in the desert. Gadotsi immediately changed the topic. Temple. Did you see the Sun King? Hearing Gadotsi say that they went to the temple in the desert, Wuming put his attention to Lucius aside. Yes, Nittacles is not the owner of this desert, so after we passed Nittacles' test, she took us to the temple to meet the owner of this desert. It should be the Sun King you mentioned. Gadotsi answered Wuming. Wuming was not surprised that Nittacles was not the owner of this desert. If she was the owner of this desert, she would not have been taken away in her sleep. Then, can you tell me who the other party is? Wuming looked at Gadotsi and the others seriously. Of course, assassin, you're being too polite. Gadotsi looked at Wuming with some resentment. Sorry. Wuming immediately patted Gadotsi's head and apologized. The head patting was still very effective on Gadotsi. At this time, Da Vinci answered Wuming's question. The other party is Ramses II. It's actually Ramses II, Wuming said with some surprise. There was no other reason but because Ramses II was a little too powerful. The king, pharaoh, who ruled the area of Egypt from the 13th to the 14th century BC was both the son of the sun god and its incarnation. Moreover, Ramses II also built many buildings and even classified the previous buildings as his own. In fact, it made sense when he thought about it this way. Because Ramses II had a large number of buildings under his name, these buildings were sublimated into relics and created a large area of desert similar to an inherent barrier. Unfortunately, we did not find a second city in the desert. This desert was summoned together with Ramses II, not his temple. Da Vinci seemed to have seen through Wuming's thoughts and directly shattered Wuming's fantasy. Wuming was a little overwhelmed. I'm just kidding. In fact, Ramses II moved all the temples together, so you can't see other temples in other parts of the desert. Wuming narrowed his eyes and stared at Da Vinci. At this moment, Wuming felt that this guy was more mischievous than himself. In short, we saw Ramses II and learned that Ramses II has the Holy Grail in his hands. The most surprising thing is, according to Ramses II, he seems to know what happened to us at the previous 5 singularities, Gadotsi said with some surprise. However, Wuming was not surprised. After all, the other party was also considered a god, just like Artoria in the Holy City at this moment. Although Wuming did not ask Artoria, Wuming believed that Artoria must only know about Gadotsi. Then, why did you leave the desert? Is it because of Ramses II's banishment? Wuming hit the nail on the head. Chapter 690. After all, Gadotsi and the other two also needed the Holy Grail. In that case, to Ramses II, Gadotsi and the others were enemies. However, Wuming did not believe that the other party only expelled Gadotsi and the others. There must be other reasons. That was why Wuming asked. Ramses II only let Nittacles punish us. In fact, it was just a fight. Because we won, Ramses II did not make things difficult for us anymore. He even told us a lot of information. From this point of view, Ramses II's character was not bad. The content of the information was as Wuming expected. The Crusaders used the Holy Grail to summon Ramses II, and then were beaten by Ramses II. He even snatched the Holy Grail and summoned his temple in this huge desert, deepening the collapse of morality in this singularity. And the reason why we were expelled is mainly because of Da Vinci. Matthew looked helplessly at Da Vinci, who was smiling without the slightest self-reflection. Da Vinci personally analyzed how Ramses II came to this singularity and his subsequent actions. Then, Ramses II actually used Da Vinci's intelligence as an excuse to take Da Vinci as his concubine. Gadotsi said halfway and could not continue. Wuming also knew the reason. It was because this seemingly gentle big sister Da Vinci was actually a man. Yes, a man. Because of Da Vinci's genius idea, after he was summoned, he created a Mona Lisa face puppet spirit base. After that, he stuffed himself into this spirit base and became a woman, but his heart was still a man. Although Da Vinci did not care about gender, he had always cared about art, which was the beauty of the Mona Lisa. I rejected the pharaoh, and then he kicked us out, Da Vinci said with a smile. Although I didn't see it, I can almost imagine the scene at that time. Even Roman could not help but complain. You must have sternly rejected the other party with a serious look on your face. This was the only way to show Da Vinci's vile taste. Isn't that obvious? Mona Lisa is art. Art doesn't get married. But because of that, the other party shamelessly offered the Lion King in the Holy City in the East, Da Vinci said with a smile. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. According to Ramses II, the Lion King is the main culprit behind the accelerated collapse of human nature, Gadotsi said. As expected, Lily's actions also accelerated the collapse of the singularity. Wuming thought to himself after hearing Da Vinci's words. So, we decided to meet the Lion King first. Moreover, meeting the Lion King was not only because the other party was also one of the culprits who caused the accelerated collapse of human reason, but also because of Matthew. I'm sorry, Senior. It's all my fault. Matthew apologized to Gadotsi. She had always had a special feeling about the Lion King in the East, so Matthew suggested that they go and take a look. However, this seemingly selfish behavior made Matthew feel deeply uneasy. It's okay, Matthew. After all, I also want to meet the Lion King. Gadotsi didn't think that Matthew was wrong, and Gadotsi also had the intention of going to the Holy City to take a look. Matthew, you want to go to the Holy City to see the Lion King because of Galahad, right? Wuming asked. Yes, Mr. Villo, because according to Mr. Ramses II and Miss Nittacles, I learned that the knights under the Lion King seem to be knights of the Round Table, Matthew explained. The Lion King who can take in the Knights of the Round Table is his real identity, King Arthur. This made Matthew, who knew that the servant attached to him was Galahad, a little concerned. Your guess is right. The Lion King is King Arthur. I just came out of the Holy City and saw him. Wuming's words not only made Matthew sigh, but even Gadotsi, Da Vinci, and even Roman, who had not spoken and only listened, also sighed. The reason why Roman didn't speak was that he didn't know much about the situation before Gadotsi and the others left the desert, so he chose to listen. However, the Lion King used the Holy Spear, his body was developed, and the Holy Spear eroded the deified King Arthur. Ha! This made Matthew stunned. In other words, the other party is also a deity. Really, why do we always meet deity-level servants? Roman, who finally spoke, let out a sigh. Do you know about the recent saint selection held in the Holy City? Wuming thought for a moment and looked at the three. Saint selection. It seemed that they didn't know about it. Wuming nodded, then told the three of them what he knew about the saint selection. Including the Lion King summoning almost all the knights of the Round Table, making the knights choose to kill each other, and using the Holy Spear to store pure humans to preserve human specimens, and the knights of the Round Table slaughtering humans who were not chosen. In short, Wuming told Gadotsi and the others all the information he could. This plan is too crazy. Isn't that abandoning almost all humans? Roman was the first to exclaim. The refugees just now were the saint selectors who were almost killed at the Holy City Gate, and the knight who chased the refugees was Tristan. It really is Tristan. Until now, when Wuming said it himself, Gadotsi and the others were completely sure that the knight with the bow was Tristan. Just like what Sira said, the other party is already a goddess, no longer a human. Da Vinci also let out a sigh. The reason why no one raised any doubts about King Arthur being a woman was because they already knew that King Arthur was a woman when they were at the Winterwood City Singularity, so they didn't have any doubts. So, Tachika, Matthew, do you still want to go to the Holy City? Roman's solemn voice came from Gadotsi's wrist. Da Vinci and Wuming also looked at the two of them. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other, then nodded at the same time. Of course we have to go. Since King Arthur has changed, we have to defeat her. Gadotsi said with great emotion. Mr. Galahad entrusted his power to me, so I will also shoulder the responsibility of being King Arthur's subject. I must stop King Arthur. As the successor of the Round Table Galahad's power, Matthew also made a choice. She stood on the opposite side of the king. Wuming also believed that if Galahad came in person, he would definitely make the same choice as Matthew. Since that's the case, let me accompany you back there. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.